And for those wishing to submit public comment for in-person attendees, please sign your name on the sign-up sheet. And then for online attendees, please message the staff via the Zoom chat. Folks who are giving public comment will have 2 minutes with a reminder to wrap up your comments up to 30 seconds left. And to submit your written comments, you may email CAPAA@capaa.wa.gov after the meeting. So CAPAA was established to bring voice and visibility to the diverse Asian, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities that call Washington state home. We advise the governor, state legislature, and all other state agencies on issues of importance to our communities, particularly as it relates to state laws, policies, and programs that implement or that impact them. We host 5 public board meetings each year to conduct official business. At this time, we will call the roll, which serves as a record of attendance for the public board meeting. As a reminder, per agency policies, any commissioner with 2 unexcused or 3 excused absences in a 12-month period will be asked to resign. As we go around, I'll ask commissioners and staff to please identify themselves by name, their pronoun, and the county in which they live. I'll first take perhaps the online attendance and then go to the in-person attendance. I might need some help seeing folks there. So I will begin since I'm online. My name is Kendall Kosai. I use he, him pronouns, and I represent Pierce County on the commission. Commissioner Lehrman.
Hi, I'm Scott Lehrman. I represent Franklin County. I'm Japanese American, and I use he, him pronouns.
Commissioner Lehrman. Commissioner Payne.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Ping Ping. In Chinese, it's Ping Ping. I came from China. I'm a community member here of Asian community in Spokane County. My pronouns is she, her. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Ping. And then Commissioner McKenna.
Teo Manawia, good morning, everybody. My name is Kiana McKenna, pronouns are she, her. I am in Spokane County, and apologies, I'm going to be off video. I'm a little bit under the weather and sick today, but happy to be here.
Thank you for making it. Okay, I think I see on the in-person owl, Commissioner Sisavati, I see you're sitting at the end of the table there.
Savati, thank you. Hi, everyone. Commissioner Iglesias Leslie with King County. Thanks for being here.
I can't see anyone else, so I might need some help if folks just around the room want to go in order and introduce themselves.
Good morning. This is Commissioner Carrie Hui. I'm representing both Yakima County and parts of King County. I use pronouns she, her.
Am I missing anyone else?
Hello, my name is Nam Nguyen. I am the Interim Executive Director of the Commission.
Hi, my name is Brenda O'Brien. Whoops. Why don't you go ahead?
My name is Brenda O'Brien. I am the project coordinator for CAPAA from Pierce County. I use she, her pronouns.
Hi, my name is Nikki Nkompkar. I'm the program manager and I use she, her pronouns.
Amazing, great. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Did I miss anyone in the room by chance? Okay, we're good to go. Okay, so the first thing on the agenda is the approval of minutes, or approval of the agenda. I'm sorry, see, brand new to this. So I'll now entertain a motion and second to approve the agenda that was sent out previously. Can I get a motion?
Second Vice Chair Kosai, I move to approve approve the agenda as presented.
Commissioner Lehrman, do I get a second?
Second here, Commissioner Sisavati.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right, a motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion or questions for the staff before we move it to a vote? Okay, seeing none, we will now call the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed, please say nay. And are there any abstentions? Great. The motion carries. Next on our agenda is the approval of the September 2024 draft board meeting minutes, which everyone has hopefully received in advance. Are there any suggested changes to the minutes at this time? Okay, once. Okay, well, seeing that there's no changes, I'll entertain a motion and a second to approve the motion, to approve the minutes. Can I get a motion, please?
Yeah, I am Ping. I move to approve the minutes. Thank you.
Is there a second?
I second.
A motion has been made and it has also been seconded. Any other discussion or questions from staff before we go to votes? Okay, we will now call the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All opposed, please say nay. And are there any abstentions? Great, the motion carries. All right, so now that the administrative part is done, we're going to, I believe, move to public comment. Is that right, Executive Director Nguyen?
Yes,
Okay.
Commissioner, but
Thank you.
do not currently have anyone signed up in person or on the Zoom.
Okay, so I think I'll read this anyways. So we're, just for the sake of it, we are now entering the public comment portion of the meeting where we can hear from the public, beginning with those who are signed up in person, then virtually, and then open the floor to all attendees to make remarks if they'd like. Please note each person has 2 minutes to submit public comment. For in-person participants, staff will raise their hand when you have 15 seconds left. And then for folks online, the clock on the screen, maybe if we have one, will help keep your time. And if you run over time, you may be cut off, sorry. As Nadine has said, we don't really have anyone signed up in person or online at the current moment. Anyone that would like to make public comment at this time?
Correct, confirming that status right now as well.
Oh, Brianna's hand raised. Hey, Brianna, it looks like you want to make public comment, so you have 2 minutes. I can also just time you on my phone here. So whenever you want to get started, we can start.
Okay, great. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. I just wanted to say that I was trying to attend the last CAPAA meeting, but the website wasn't working for me to find the meeting information. And then I found out that the meeting already passed after I was able to connect with CAPAA. And then for this meeting, I didn't know about it until yesterday. And so I guess I just wanted to put in a request to maybe send out the meeting information earlier if the email list is going to be used to attract more people to the CAPAA meeting. Sometimes I check the website to find the meeting information, but it would be really helpful if the meeting information could be sent in the email blast at least 1 week in advance. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Brianna. We'll make a note of that. And we also have an email listserv. I wonder if you're also part of that?
I am, but I only found out about the meeting yesterday.
Yes, we'll make a note to send it out earlier. I apologize for that.
I'll follow up and make sure that we. Anyone else that wants to make public comment? Oh, well, that means we have reached the end of the in-person and Zoom sign up for public comment. And that concludes the public comment portion of our meeting. We will now turn to CAPAA's Executive Director, Nam Nguyen, to present the November staff report.
Yes, everyone should have a copy of the report. I sent it out a couple of days ago. here's the brief summary of the report. I'll skip the commissioner activity. We are still, the governor's office still has our recommendation for the appointment for the open seat that was vacated by me when I took over the interim director position. We expect someone to be appointed before the end of the year. It's unusual to take this long, but there was some, we had problem reaching out to one of the top candidates. I think he was out of the country. As for finance, CAPAA is actually in very good financial condition. We're actually spending slightly below the budget for fiscal 2025. There was no sponsorship request this month, but as for the budget, almost all state agencies were asked to look at their budget to see if there was a possible cut to be made. CAPAA wasn't asked directly to make any changes, just to have, if we have any suggestion for any cuts, to make them, and we may look at the travel budget and the meeting budget to see if there's cuts, but probably not this year, probably maybe next year, as the state is currently undergoing a estimated $10 billion shortfall, which is quite a bit. The one thing is also on the staff report is require equity training for anybody on the commission that's not undergone the training. This is probably the last time we'll be on the report, but we'll keep reminding you. One of the things that we did that was between the meetings was that we welcome a delegation from the independent state of Samoa, or also known as Western Samoa, that was led by their prime minister. We facilitated meetings with the lieutenant governor office as the governor was out of town, and also other events. The person leading this project was actually the main organizer was led by our chair, Lydia Fatalia. And this is an opportunity that we wanted to participate in, wanted to help out the chair and also the Samoan community. And if there's other future opportunity to welcome something like that, a delegation from overseas, CAPAA would definitely be interested in participating and look into it. But there are also political and budgetary consideration. For this particular meeting, we thought that it was a great idea, and we helped out Chair Fatalia. I neglected to put something on the agenda, but Carrie, could you talk about the Wapato event?
Yes, in last month, the Filipino American community of Yakima Valley had a ceremony in which they were able to be recognized as a National Historic Site. The Filipino Community Hall has been there for over 70 years, and will be celebrating its upcoming, next year will be the 75th anniversary. So it was a wonderful event to have this recognition for this long-standing history of the Filipino American community in Eastern Central Washington. I do know that Commissioner Lehrman was actually in attendance, and we were able to have a letter from our executive director, Nam Nguyen, to congratulate the Filipino American community on this really great event and recognition.
Thank you, Carrie. And again, if you have any project or things you're working on that you believe the commission can help with, such as this one that Carrie was a part of, please let us know. We'll help if we can. The next part is the transition to the new governor. As everyone probably know by now, Governor-elect Bob Ferguson has begun transitioning to the governorship. He has named his executive leadership team, and they're mostly people from his team at the Attorney General office. In fact, probably 8 out of 9 or 7 out of 8 were from the Attorney General office. So as a former AAG, I know what to expect. I've worked with most of these people, and they're mostly an excellent staff. They're very policy focused. A little different from Governor Inslee. It's probably going to be more policy focused, more procedural, and more, I guess, agenda-driven focus than the personal focus of Governor Inslee. He has also named his transition team, which include former Director Hasegawa and former commissioner and current state senator Jasmine Trudeau. We're gonna begin to work with the governor, the incoming governor, and also at the same time, probably wrap up our work with Governor Inslee, who has been very supportive of the commission over the year. But this does put us in a period that's the transitional period where we're still figuring out things like budget and legislative priorities, which makes it harder than previous year because of the new team coming in and they're still working out on the transition process. Bear in mind, this is the first transition in more than a decade. Okay. And the last item on the agenda is the meeting calendar for 2025. It's sent out in we sent email out about this. We'll also actually discuss this later in the agenda for today. So yes, you will have a chance later today to learn about the specifics and any objection you have or any conflict you have on the meeting schedule for next year. And that's it for the staff report, other than there will be a photo op with Governor Inslee later this year. We don't know the date yet. It will be in Olympia, although we are trying to work on having him meet us in Seattle, but it will likely be Olympia. Every commissioner is invited and we will provide travel reimbursement. We'll try to have an event there, a social event on the same day, because we know that you're coming down to Olympia, for most of you, either from over the mountains or from Seattle, King County, or Pierce County, for basically a 15-minute event. So we'll try to provide other things for you to do there as well. It will mostly not be official, as we cannot start to vote on official business without providing notice to the public. But keep in mind, well, I can't ask you to keep your calendar open because I don't know which date it is. We're trying for the first week of December, but the governor's office has not gotten back to us. I believe he's overseas along with the staff that's providing logistic on this photo opportunity. Yep, and our next meeting will be online on January 11th from 10 to 1:30. Thank you.
So thank you, Interim Executive Director. Are there any questions for the staff report? No efficient. Okay. I think that maybe Commissioner Upala may have just joined the room. Commissioner Upala, I know you're vice chair. Would you like to take over for me, or do you want me to keep going?
Sure, I can. Thank you so much.
Education.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. We will now turn to our guests, Executive Director Randy Spalding, to give us an update on the SB's new graduation standard. Thank you.
Hi, good morning.
Thank you, Executive Director Spalding. Please introduce yourself while staff loads your PowerPoint.
Yes, thank you. I forgot something, so.
Sure.
I'm Randy Spalding. I'm the Executive Director for the State Board of Education. And what I forgot was snorkels, and I'll explain this. Yeah, before I introduce the board, so the State Board of Education, I'll give a little bit of background here, but we have responsibility for graduation requirements, more broadly advocating for a system of K-12 education, as well as role and accountability and in ensuring that students are receiving the program of basic education. So that's the broad brush. You're going to see a slide that goes slightly deeper than that. The reason I have my friend here is the board also in statute has a requirement to adopt a seal. And so we adopted snorkels from World Wildlife Fund as kind of a joke initially, but it actually has turned out to be a good engagement tool, especially when we talk to younger kids. So we had a couple of contests with kids around, what do you like about school? And what are the challenges and what would you like to see more of? And so it's been a really good way, especially with younger kids, to engage. We have an Instagram account for snorkels. And so I like to bring snorkels along and offer photo ops at breaks and things like that if folks are interested in that. So we'll go ahead and get started here. This is our board. The State Board of Education is a 16-member board. The boards are either elected or appointed, so 7 are governor-appointed members. 5 are appointed by local school board directors, and we just had an election, so we'll be welcoming a new member soon, and that announcement should be posted shortly. And then we also have the state superintendent of public instruction. We have an elected private school representative, and we have 2 student members who are selected by the board in collaboration with the association AWSL, Student Leaders, Association of Washington Student Leaders, so which is run by the Principals Association. Excuse me, my acronyms are not up to speed on today. So at any rate, and so we have 2 student members as well. That recruitment occurs in January each year. It's a 2-year term. It's a rising junior that we bring onto the board. And so you should watch for an announcement around that as well when we start recruiting for our next student. Up until 2 years ago, that was either east side or west side. And we've moved that to a statewide selection process each year. So go ahead with the next slide. So our mission for the board, we just adopted a new strategic plan, so I want to just share a little bit about it. We revised the way our mission is structured a little bit to be a little more focused on our role with students and engaging with communities. And so our mission is to be equitable, inclusive K-12 education system that fulfills the vision that every student being empowered with the knowledge and skills they need to thrive in a changing world. And there is a statutory purpose of a diploma, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, that kind of goes into some of the specifics around that, but we think this better captures the broader thing that we're trying to achieve with our system and our students. The board has also been going through a lot of work in the last few years around better engaging with the communities that we serve and trying to be more inclusive in our policymaking process. And that has kind of caused us to think differently about the approach to policy that we're taking. So go to the next slide. As part of the strategic planning process, they came up with a set of values. I'm not going to read through this, but I think what you'll see, the themes here are really around student voice, student empowerment and agency, as well as embracing community in that. So I think that's what I hope you'll see. I'll just pause on this slide a moment so you can see this. This was a 2-year process actually in developing the values piece. And my colleague at the Professional Educator Standards Board, Erica Hernandez-Scott, started the board off with some facilitated work around that, did a fabulous job, and then over time we were able to really kind of compress this down into something more concise. And so let's go ahead to the next slide. The other piece of work that the board is engaged in and we've really wrapped into our new strategic plan is Profile of a Graduate. And this is really, this is a process that started with a work group. It was the, the Mastery-Based Learning Work Group, which was an external work group that we staffed, and they developed this through a public process. And what this is intended to do is reconcile a couple of different ideas in statute. And also, again, kind of what are we trying to move our students towards? And so we have on the left the goals of basic education, which include sort of, we want people to have the core knowledge, but we also want them to have these transferable skills as well. And so the piece in the middle, which is the profile itself, really kind of expands on what are those transferable skills? What do we want students to know and be able to do when they move out of our system? And I would say too, these are sort of targets for learning and development. We do not expect that you're going to hit this and be done learning how to embrace diversity, for example, but it's a lifelong ongoing process, right? And so this is really part of what students should be developing skills, but we would hope they would continue to develop these skills after they leave our system in K-12. And then finally on the right is the purpose of the diploma, which I mentioned earlier, and this is what our prior mission was kind of focused around, was this idea of preparation for success in post-secondary education, gainful employment, and civic engagement, and lifelong learning. And that's still critically important, but we think that the language we come up with now in our mission vision is a little better articulation of kind of the broader purpose of this. So that's kind of where we are on that. Next slide. As I mentioned, we are really changing how we approach our policy work. And so we've been very actively engaging and continue to engage in more of a co-development process around our policymaking. And you're going to see this come through in our strategic plan and in the Future Ready initiative, which I'm leading up to here. This has come out of a lot of the things we had been hearing from the community, but also we a couple years ago were successful in getting funding for a community engagement position at our agency. And so that included both a staff position, but importantly, some resources as well, so that we could contract with local organizations and we could bring folks into conversations and compensate them for their time and their knowledge when they came into those conversations. And so this just barely preceded the larger push as a state through the Office of Equity on those same kinds of ideas. And so it's been a really good learning experience for us and good opportunity for the board to really broaden its reach. Boards are intended to do that kind of thing anyway through the board member connections, but this really makes us more able to do it in a broader and more comprehensive way. And we're moving to a more sort of systematic approach to that as well. So let's go on to the next one. So as you, and I encourage you to dive into our strategic plan, but the thing you will not see in our strategic plan is a set of specific initiatives that are like, we're gonna do this thing on this day. Really what we're trying to lay out in there is these are our areas of responsibility, and this is how we're going to approach the work going forward, and this is how we're prioritizing those things within that work. And so I mentioned we have advocacy and oversight for public education. This is something that usually most visibly manifests itself through our legislative platform and our advocacy in the legislature, but also through some of our outreach efforts as well. And we've done some reorganization within our staff to have a group of staff who are really focused on that outreach piece. High school graduation and learning standards. This is where the Future Ready initiative stands, and this is sort of the first thing that we think is important to talk about. And I'm going to dive in more deeply in this, but this is really about rethinking our graduation requirements and our approach to learning in our K-12 system. And then basic education has traditionally been sort of a compliance piece. And so this has been a model where we ask districts to self-certify that they're doing all the things that are required under the program of basic education. So that's instructional time and required offerings and those sorts of things. We're trying to better leverage that information as we get it back. So that process is ongoing. It's actually an educational process as well, because there's often a lot of turnover in districts. We have new superintendents, new board members, new principals. And so it's the superintendents who are the respondents to the survey, but it is an educational process with them. And it's also an opportunity to highlight all the different things that are required. And so one of the things we wanted to get, we heard a lot from districts about there's too many mandates, it's not funded. And this allows us to kind of better capture what does that actually look like. So anyway, that's how we're trying to leverage that. And then we're also trying to use the information we get from that survey in our other areas, which historically is not something we've done in the same sort of systemic way. And then finally, educational system health, accountability, and recognition. We have a role in the state accountability system, and we're really trying to rethink that as well so that we can get information that's both more actionable and better represents what's happening in the schools in our system. And so we've done a fair amount of work laying the foundation for that. We've also, actually right before COVID, revised our recognition system to better recognize schools in particular. So those schools that are identified for improvement and things like that are now able to receive recognition for actually making progress on closing gaps and doing the things that they've been asked to do through that identification process, as well as emphasizing growth in our education system as well. So that's been, and that will be an ongoing conversation as well. We do this in collaboration with OSPI and EOGOAC. So that work is continuing. So that's the foundational piece. I'm just going to take a breath there and see if there are any questions. I talk fast, I apologize. So, and then we'll dive into Future Ready.
Any questions from commissioners?
If I forget, what was the name of the seal?
Snorkels is the seal. The Snorkels was named by a student through a competition, so that was part of our process. So we did a statewide competition and included a 2-question survey, which is really, what do you like about your school, and what would you like to see change?
I have a question. So the purpose, partly we scheduled this meeting and we set the agenda mostly on education. Every presenter here is education. And this is partly not just to educate us on education, the Commission on Education, it's for you guys here to meet each other and to work together. But I have this question, like a lot of this seems like an overlap with OSBI. What's the difference between your two?
Yeah, there's actually a fair amount of overlap. So the board, for example, and we'll talk a little bit more about this with Future ID, and I think it's actually important later on your agenda as well, where the board sets graduation requirements. So that's which courses are required for high school graduation. The state board, the superintendent of public instruction establishes learning standards, which is what students need to know and be able to do in order to meet specific areas of knowledge. And so the superintendent's office chooses the math standards. We would say that you need to have these levels of math. And so that's the interplay there. We have similar kind of overlaps in the other areas also. But that's a relatively simple one to kind of describe. The board still has a relationship with learning standards. We have the ability to request changes to the learning standards. We can't force a change, but we can request a change. And then when, as is happening right now, OSPI is going through a process to revise and review and potentially revise the learning standards. And the board will have an opportunity to review those changes and provide feedback before they're finalized. And so that's another interplay between the two agencies.
Can I raise my hand? I have a question. Thank you. Scott Lehrman from Pasco, served on the school board, local school board here for about 10 years. So know a number of your board members there. But a question I would have is, so that first bullet there, champion educational equity, diversity, all of that. But then we say you guys are, your main tenet is to recommend what learning standards are. What kind of recommendations do you make on the state board in the areas of equity or diversity?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's actually part of what we're gonna likely be diving into further. The board passed a resolution, I think 3 years ago, I don't remember the exact date now, around asking for better articulation of issues around diversity and equity and ethnic studies in both the learning standards across the curriculum, as well as potentially considering a graduation requirement in that space. In that, we have not adopted a change in that area, and that launched a lot of learning for the board and with other agencies to better understand what this actually would look like in K-12. And so we're still walking through that process to see what makes the most sense in terms of how to implement something. In terms of the advocacy space, the board has been signing on in support, for example, of the changes to since time immemorial that have been asked for, to put a firmer timeline on implementation of since time immemorial. We're supportive of that bill initially and continue to support full implementation of that around the state. And that actually links to some of the work around basic ed, because we actually are collecting data on that requirement to understand whether districts have implemented and kind of where they are in their implementation process. And I neglected to bring those numbers with me today. But we can provide that, and we'll be doing a report in February on that as well. But not just that requirement, but all the data collected through that survey. But most districts are offering the since time immemorial curriculum. Fewer of them are doing the tribal consultation that's required under that, so as an example. A little bit different issue, we also had 2 resolutions over the last almost 30 years on the tribal mascots and offensive mascots, and that bill finally passed a couple of years ago, and so the board was very supportive of moving that policy forward as well.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. Sorry, I know there's a number of slides he's going to get through, but I wanted to just kind of, I'm curious because every state is different, but in terms of this, the SBE's oversight of school climate or, incidents of bullying or the UCR process, or UCP process, what is the board's role in Washington State around school climate in particular?
Yeah, so that's also a good question. So that connects to the accountability system. And so when the current school improvement framework was adopted, there was a recommendation as part of that to add measures. School climate was one of those measures that was going to be added. There's also one around teacher quality and preparation and one around school discipline. None of those have been added to the framework yet. That's something the board had been advocating for and working on. We did a fair amount of work on school climate because the limitation in that specific area was different than the others. And that is that there is not a statewide tool where we collect that information on a regular basis. And so we explored mandating a school climate survey a few years ago. That didn't go anywhere. We went through a process where we actually got some funding from the legislature and worked with University of Washington around designing what a framework might look like. And we didn't move that forward in part because we were starting to get some feedback from communities that the model we were going to may not be serving their needs and they weren't really fully included in that development process. The primary concern that seemed to be coming out of that is they wanted to ensure that if students, parents, community members took the time and effort to complete the survey and provide their feedback, that something would be done with it. And there wasn't really a clear mechanism for that in the model. And so we're still continuing, that's still an issue that we're interested in moving forward and trying to figure out what the right balance point is to ensure that districts aren't mandated to use yet another thing that maybe doesn't serve them. That there's a third element, which is a lot of districts actually had tools they liked. And so we were trying to figure out how do we continue to support those tools that are working well in the places where it's working well. And so at any rate, that's where it stands right now on that particular one. So the board doesn't have a specific mandate on school climate, but it is part of the accountability design, but not yet implemented in the framework. As we move to our state framework that I mentioned, that also would try to incorporate some of those elements. In that, we'll probably, as a starting point, because in the state framework, which is different than, right now it's one and the same as the federal framework, but we have more flexibility on the state level to change it. And so on that, we can look at statewide indicators as well. And for that, we could use some of the Healthy Youth Survey questions and things like that, at least to get a statewide picture, but we can't drill that down to the school or district level because we don't have the data to do that. It's hard to know where to look with the owl, I'm sorry.
Questions in the chat, right?
Yeah, we have some questions in the chat. We have Commissioner Ping, who asked if you could please state what is the new graduation standard for high schoolers?
So we do not have currently a new standard other than we moved to the 24 credit framework, and that was effective for all students in 2021. So that includes, I don't have a slide that shows the full framework, but that was the change from 19 credits to 24 credits, included a third credit of math, a third credit of science, and 4 years of English, and is largely aligned with post-secondary expectations. There have been a few other additions that have come in, things like the standalone civics course, which was a legislative mandate, and pieces like that. But and then the biggest change in recent years was the change from the state mandated test to high school pathways, which provides more flexibility in how students meet that. And just last year, maybe it's 2 years ago now, I'm sorry, a little bit fuzzy on time, but we added a new pathway around that. It's a performance-based pathway. And so that's adding more flexibility to the existing structure, but it wasn't really a fundamental change to the requirements.
We have one comment from Frida Takamura saying that as your representative, I'd like to express my sincere appreciation to Randy and to the state board for their work. And I'm going to summarize because we, just to be considerate of time, we have another question from Commissioner Lehrman. How do you advocate for Senate Bill 6314? Is it a legislative priority or any other efforts on advocacy?
Okay, thank you, Frida, and she's been a great supporter in several of our work groups. So, and on the 6314, I think that's a good transition point to talk about Future Ready and talk more broadly about our approach to how we want to think about graduation requirements more generally. And it would fold into that conversation. And so our answer in terms of how specific bills that we would support when we see that what that looks like in the next iteration of that bill, we would make a decision about where it fits in our framework or in our advocacy role. But more broadly, our position and go to Future Ready. The Future Ready is a comprehensive approach to graduation requirements. And so what our advocacy last session was on most of the graduation bills that were floated, and there were many different graduation or standards bills, I should say, or other kind of learning elements. Depending on how you count, there was a lot of different bills on this last session. And so our approach to that, and as it happened, we had already had our draft strategic plan out, so it helped with this advocacy, was to say, there's a lot of things that people are asking for, and we want to take a step back and look at the whole, rather than take a position on individual items within that. And that's not to say any specific item isn't important, but rather, if we're going to add something, what do we make more flexible, or what do we remove in order to do that? And that's really what Future Ready is about. So I'm going to dive a little bit more deeply into that. How am I doing on time, by the way?
You didn't find you have, well, you can go over.
Okay.
I talked to the next presenter, 5-10 minutes. Yes.
All right. So that's really what this slide, if you read all the words, is trying to get at, which is that concept. And so if we go to the next slide, just really foundationally, the board has already authority to do this. We're actually told in statute to periodically review the graduation standards. We did draft a bill that we probably would not advance that basically tells us to do this work. But because we already have authority, we're probably not going to do that. We do have a related budget request as well that we wanted to move forward, and that was why we drafted the accompanying legislation if it turns out to be needed. So we are required to do this periodically, and the board can make changes to the graduation requirements. There is an interplay with the legislature when we make those changes. So the board can make changes, they have to do it in such a way that the legislature has the opportunity to shift our direction or provide comment on it before we finalize our rules. And then on the next slide, you'll see we do not have a proposal at this time for a new graduation requirement. We want to be really clear about that. This is a process. This is really hearing from those that we serve and the communities that we serve about how do we reconcile an issue that you're going to see, I think, on the next slide. Hopefully this is right order. Yeah, on the next slide. And this is a Venn diagram. Jay Lee Schultz, who's our deputy executive director, found this concept, and it's different than a Venn diagram. But this is trying to demonstrate that two things can be true that appear to be contradictory. And this is a super helpful framework to look at, because we, on the one hand, have students telling us that they don't have enough opportunity to develop their critical skills, this is things like financial ed, computer science, et cetera, and they're not engaged. And this is true even of what we would consider to be the highest achieving students. They don't feel engaged in their learning. They figured out how to do school, but they're not engaged. And then on the other side, there's too much of a lot of things. There's too much tinkering around the edges and adding little pieces. The requirements are complex. They're hard to communicate and understand. They may not be equitable. And in some cases, and for some students, they're too rigid. And so that's, and we think both of these things are true. And so this is why we're saying we really need to take a step back and look at this with our partners to better understand this. And to drive this point home a little bit more, we did some listening sessions a couple years ago in 2022. So go to on this slide, this is how students and community members describe the current requirements. And so confusing, overwhelming, stressful, too specific, and challenging, that's I guess a positive and a negative potentially. At any rate, so that's what they see in the current framework. If we go to the next slide, this is what they would like to see. They want something that's relevant, attainable, clear, flexible. And again, when you talk to individual students, this really comes through clearly in different groups and rooms that we've been in. So that's really what we're trying to kind of reconcile all this, and to do that, we're going to bring folks together. If we go one more slide just to share, this is the current framework for graduation requirements. Students have to do a high school and beyond plan. They have to have a specific set of courses. That's the 24 credits. And actually, every student's eligible for 2 of those credits to be waived. So it's, but that is a waiver process, not a student choice necessarily. And then they have to complete a graduation pathway. So that could be a test, standardized test. It could be a particular set of courses, or and we've added the performance-based pathway, which is could be a portfolio or presentation or a play. It's intended to be very flexible. And there is a rubric though, so that we ensure that students are meeting learning standards in either English or math or both. But it is intended to be flexible in terms of how students approach this work. So the next slide, as we go forward, again, this is another one I will not read to you. But we have some objectives in kind of how we're approaching this work. And it really comes down to that reconciliation process that I was talking about around how do we align with the profile. So that's why I started with the profile. How do we make sure these things are clear and concise and give students agency in their learning and help better engage them, ensure that it's aligned with post-secondary expectations and needs so that students are well prepared when they move on. And also ensuring that districts have the tools and the time they need to actually implement these changes. That's often left off the table when we make these kinds of changes, and I think that's really an essential element here. And then our approach to the work on the next page is, this is sort of how we're structuring this. And so we're bringing together a task force that will include community voice as well as some of the various entities and agencies that have a hand in education, but we have a pretty complex education governance system in Washington, and we have a lot of people at the table, and so not everybody is going to be represented on the task force. And so we are also going to have subcommittees. Those will bring in content experts that will dive deeper on specific issues. So for example, we would have a subcommittee that looks at that secondary to post-secondary transition and those requirements. And then finally, community liaisons, and so this is, again, bringing that community voice. We're going to be working with a third party to help contract so that we can bring community members in who will have an explicit role in how they connect to community and get compensated for that, and also compensate, have ways to compensate the community members that come to the table. So that's the overall structure. If we go to the next slide, it's just a little bit deeper dive about who we hope to have at the table, and this is the complexity. Our task force, we're trying to keep to around 30 people, and we have more than 30 things we want represented on that. And so this is not an exhaustive list, even though it looks quite comprehensive, but these are the kinds of experiences and lived experiences and other kinds of backgrounds we're hoping to bring to the community, and then the sectors in K-12, policy, employers, post-secondary education, community organizations, and of course, students and families. Let's do one more slide, and this kind of just reiterates the roles. So the task force is sort of these cross-sector representatives. It's this relatively small group, subcommittees to dive deeper into subject matter knowledge, and then the community liaisons. This would be people who are on this task force who are charged with reaching out to the communities and bringing back information to the task force meetings. And then timing on this, so we kind of had a soft launch this summer. Most of that's been internal work, trying to get organized around this. And then we do have a webinar coming up. It's actually next week on Tuesday at noon, and so you'll find information about that on our website. I did not put that link in here, but I can send it afterwards. But if you Google State Board of Education Future Ready, you should find it that way as well. And then throughout 2025, we'll be having meetings of our task force. These are designed to be kind of in the interim periods between our board meetings. So our board meetings are every even month, and so these will be in the odd months, and so that we have this constant conversation between our board and what's happening in the Future Ready work as well. And we will have board members on Future Ready. Let's see, I think I went fast, but I think, finally, the outcome on this, we do anticipate there will be legislative ask at the end of this to potentially change graduation requirements. That would be most likely the 2027 session before we make that ask. And then, of course, it would include an appropriate phase-in timeline as we move forward. And we also have a funding ask right now that will be for this session to help support this work. I will say, and you're a public board, so you probably appreciate this, but boards aren't really well structured for the kind of engagement we're talking about here, and we're usually not funded for that either. And so the ask on this is to really bring the resources necessary. We have some private resources coming in, we think, and we also are asking the legislature to put some resources in so that we can have the funding necessary to do the deep community engagement that we want to do on this. And that concludes my remarks. So other questions that you have for me?
Can you go back to the part on the standard? There's a purpose portion. I think one more. So
next one?
Yeah, the purpose.
Oh, yes.
So I see 4 purpose, and I think they're all great. Purpose, I can't read the last one.
Oh, yeah, so this is actually in statute. So this is the purpose of a diploma, and this is in statute. So it's post-secondary education, gainful employment. The statute actually says citizenship, civic engagement is how we've translated that, and lifelong learning.
So for the actually K to 12 level, does it make sense to have one education standard to meet all the purpose? I think civic engagement and it definitely should be on any standard, right?
Yeah.
But for a kid going to post-secondary education versus a kid that by his junior year will go into mostly focus on employment after high school, does it make sense to have the same standard? Or should we be focusing more on kind of having a more tailored standard to the specific students' needs?
Yeah, so I think you could, that post-secondary education is, so districts are required to provide students the opportunity to meet the requirements for public 4-year. Not every student has to meet those requirements. So it's really, maybe post-secondary opportunities would be a better way to think about that, to get to your point. There is flexibility in the grad requirements that can help students make those decisions about, do I want to be more focused on going into career than college? But the grad requirements are also structured to make that distance shorter between the two, so that if a student says, I'm going to prepare for a career, they're not way behind in terms of if they change their mind and want to go to college. So they're still going to have 4 years of English. They may not have the same English, depending on how they flex that year, or they may, more likely math. When the math requirement changed to a 3-year requirement, initially it was Algebra 2, which is what the colleges want, but now it's just a 3rd year of math. So there may be students who are coming out without Algebra 2, and so it needs to be an informed choice when they make that decision, because they likely will need to take additional math when they go on to college.
I have a follow-up question.
Yeah.
And that's on the one aspect I think it should be part of every K to 12 education, and that's the civic engagement part. Can you actually elaborate on that? Because going back to my high school experience, I thought that was probably the worst taught part of high school education, usually taught by, a lot of times taught by somebody who's also coaching football or another sports. So how do we I mean, it's easier to know how a student is doing in something like English, because they have to take the SAT, math, because they have to pass the AP test, or also the SAT. But in terms of civic engagement or civic education, how do we uphold the standard?
Yeah, that's a good, and there are learning standards associated with this, and what's changed in the last few years on this, there are actually two bills in the last few years, but the more recent one requires that students have a standalone civics course as part of their high school experience. And
it doesn't say how good it is, though.
It does say what it has to cover, though. Yeah, I mean, we don't say how good any of these courses need to be, except that they need to meet standards. And actually, the definition of a credit, this is something that changed in 2012. Used to be, definition of a credit was based on seat time. That was the Carnegie unit. Carnegie no longer supports the Carnegie unit, by the way. But in 2012, the state moved away from that, and we moved to a standards-based model where the definition of a credit is meeting learning standards of the subject matter. And so, while individual results may vary, the intent and the standard that's set for that is that students do need to be at hitting those learning standards in order to earn credit for this. And then in the civics example, there's also specific things that need to happen in that civics course, including state government, understanding the state and U.S. Constitution, et cetera. And so there's a little bit higher standard set on that than there, in terms of what needs to be covered than in other subject areas, because it's spelled out in law. Usually, like in math, we don't spell out in law what math content needs to be there, but in civics we do.
Oh, great.
Any additional questions maybe from the chat?
Yes.
Commissioner Ping has their hand raised.
Commissioner Ping, please go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much for the presentation and communication with us. Randy, right? Your name? Hope I can say it rightly. I just want to add a comment, follow up our Commissioner Nam's question on the civic engagement. That I really appreciate the State of Board Education has done a conference on the West Coast, student conference. The name of the video is called Modern Day Racism in Education. I remember that was made, I mean, that the conference was done maybe in 2020. It was done by 5 or 6 students from the BIPOC backgrounds, Asian, Pacific Islander, Black student, Hispanic student. Yeah, so it's quite inspiring that our high school students that they have such very, very deep observation of how the schools are doing the equity and the inclusion work. So I just hope that, yeah, that is a civic engagement thing to see in like it's really happening. And I just hope that this kind of the conference can be continue. And you mentioned that you will have a partnership with the community. So I think that our own high school students is a big resource for your for your department. Yeah, that's just my I just want to add this as a comment. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And that was led by Margarita Mezcua, who was one of our student board members. And 2 things came out of that, actually, that I think are really impactful for the board. One is that was really the foundation for the board's resolution on ethnic studies at the time. And it's also what I would say that was foundational in helping launch an initiative by the board to get student member the vote. It was actually picked up by one of her colleagues on the board who really pushed that further, McKenna Roberts, who was the one who was probably pushed it the most, and we also the student that followed Margarita as our West Side rep at that time, Pavan also was really engaged in that work. and got the bill passed to give students full voting rights on the board. So I think both of those actually came out of that conversation, because that conversation was happening at a time where students were really asking for, with good reason, a better voice at the table in terms of education policy. And so I appreciate you raising that. That was outstanding work that she had done on that, and it is the type of work we hope to do more of, so, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I did show that video as a requirement for my students in my sociology class. So Margarita and her fellow students all inspire my students in Spokane community.
Oh, I'm gonna reach out to Margarita and let her know that. She'll be thrilled.
Do we have time for one more question?
Yeah, one more question.
I just had a quick question for you.
Yes.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I wanted to know if there was any focus going to be on life skills and vocational training, any equivalency for vocational classes that students may opt for instead or in addition to, just recognizing that that's going to become a bigger part of our future.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I hope that will come out of the conversations. The life skills portion of it probably will, because that often has been kind of narrowly translated as financial education, but when you hear students talk about what they mean by that, it is a broader set of life skills than, and often they'll drift from talking about wanting to know how to balance a checkbook, which I don't know if anybody does that anymore, but or sign a contract or rent an apartment, those sorts of things. They often move from that into things like change a tire or do like sew a button or thing. It's a much broader set of things that come out of that. I don't think all those are ever going to be in the curriculum, but having that conversation, I think, is important about
and I think more on the vocational training, just understanding that
yes.
We're losing those.
Yes, and that part, there's been a fair push on that, because that's one of the pathways for the high school graduation pathways. And I think, if we're starting to talk about more explicitly the vocational training aspects, that will almost certainly come through, because we're seeing a lot more through things like Career Connect Washington and trying to highlight additional pathways beyond traditional four-year college pathways and things like that. So I think that will almost certainly be part of the conversation. I did bring handouts for folks if you would like to take one, and I think the link is also in the materials. Is that right? Yes.
It's been shared.
Vice Chair, can I ask one more quick question? I know you said there was only time for one more question, but if you have a minute, on the slide, I think something that's valid here is on slide 15, I think it's the upper right corner, we talk about equity inclusion. How would the state board see education for Asian American Pacific Islanders coming in? I mean, you guys are focused on graduation requirements. Slide 15, I think there.
Yeah, so I think
prioritizing that, would that be part of graduation requirements that would be lumped into like the civics class, or would that be another set of credits, or are we really advocating down at the lower level to teach K-3, about this type of stuff, or would it be a graduation requirement?
Yeah, I think I think it kind of depends on how one wanted to structure such a thing. So this is, I think, I would say if we're talking about really bringing history and culture into the curriculum, I think it needs to be an and. So I think there needs to be an opportunity for students to explore more deeply in high school. And so that could be an elective, or it could be something within a set of requirements, like a choice within requirements. But more importantly, if you really wanted to bring it into the learning standards, is probably the more appropriate place to have that, so that it's throughout the curriculum. So it is happening in elementary, middle, and high school. And that's been the approach since time immemorial, and I think that is probably the more effective approach to address that issue.
Thank you.
Just a quick comment. We have an education committee with CAPAA, and we'd love to have you join us in one of the meetings at a later time.
Yeah, happy to join anytime, and really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I'm going to stick around through the day too. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, good morning, team. My apologies for the delay this morning, but here we are rocking and rolling. You all leaders got the meeting started and the conversation, so thank you very much for your patience and grace. Next on our agenda, we will now turn to the University of Washington team to provide us with an update on their education disparities studies. Please introduce yourself. All staff, load your PowerPoint presentation. The floor is now yours. Thank you very much for the extra materials.
Everybody, thank you so much for having us. So yeah, we'll get our slides going. We have come out as a team today, so we have myself, we'll introduce ourselves kind of as we get to our portions of speaking, but my name is Max Halverson. I'm a research scientist in the University of Washington School of Social Work. And we're really grateful to be able to share our work with you so far. So Dr. Spencer's on the call. He's the principal investigator on the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander side of the report. And Dr. Min Sun is here as well. She's the principal investigator on the Asian American side of the report. And I'm the project director, so I've been kind of working together with everybody to move this forward. So Dr. Spencer is going to start us off with some remarks. He's there on our Zoom screen.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. So sorry I couldn't be there in person today. I'm in Portland. I have important business here. I have a new grandson who's 2 months old, so I only got to see him initially at the NICU and when he was in NICU. So this is my first chance to see him in his home environment. So apologies for not being there in person, but I had very important business. So as you might understand. I just want to say thank you so much, first of all, for providing us not only the opportunity to work on this project, but also to have the opportunity to present some preliminary results today. We still have quite a ways to go, but being halfway through, we feel really good about the progress. We feel really good about some of the findings that we're beginning to see, and we can go ahead and get to the next slide, and I can give you a little overview of what we're going to be doing today. So first of all, the goals of our session today is basically to update all of you on the project, which is to look at the educational opportunity gap for Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in the state of Washington. As you folks know, our team here is all from the University of Washington. Min Sun, Dr. Min Sun is a professor in the School of Education, and she is leading the Asian American student report. And myself and my team will be leading the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander student report. There will be two very separate reports. With this presentation today, you're going to see a combination of both Asian American data and Native Hawaiian Pacific Island data presented sometimes back to back. Then I just want to make clear to us today, the intention is that these will not be reported together in the final report, that these will be two very separate reports. And there will be, and there's a natural tendency when you present data in this fashion to compare. There's really no comparisons that are being done today between these two groups. We're just presenting data on the status of these two groups. So I just wanted to be clear that the intention for us is not to compare Asian Americans to Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander Americans at all. There'll be two separate reports, so you'll see both datas presented sometimes in sequence though. And then finally, as you all know, this is part of a report that was originally done in 2008 by a group of individuals, including David Takeuchi, who I know I work with here at the University of Washington, and this report here is a follow-up to that report, and we do hope that there will be more reports like this in the future. Next slide. Again, to introduce our study team, in addition to, as you can see on both sides of the ledger, we have the Asian American study, which is led by Dr. Min Sun, as well as doctoral candidates, Jen Nguyen, as well as Victor Tian, who is a doctoral student. On the Native Hawaiian side, we have myself, Max, who has introduced himself, Professor Jane Lee, who is also with us at the School of Social Work, and my wonderful doctoral candidate, Centino Camacho. We also have a number of research assistants working on the project. Koa, Marcus, Tasi, Buddy, Danny, Alyssa, and Whitney. These individuals all as I think one of the things that we wanted to highlight on this was you can see that not only is our team diverse, but our team consists of predominantly Asian Americans and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders, and some people like myself and Max and Centino are both. So we're pretty well represented group here. Next slide. So just a quick overview of the study structure. First and foremost, I want to say, I'm glad that we followed that last presentation. We got to hear a little bit because we heard how important community engagement is to processes in terms of working with students and their families. And so this study is really one in which we have designed it to maximize community input, particularly from leaders serving these communities, but also, as you will see, also data in the form of both quantitative and qualitative data that we really try to hear the voices of our students and our families and our community members. And we, while we are providing much quantitative data, which we'll talk about in a second, we really do want to highlight the voices, understand the lived experiences, and hear from student and family perspectives on, as well as teacher perspectives on what can be done differently. Next slide. So Max, are you going to take this one?
I'll take over at this point. So
Okay, thank you.
So this is going to mirror what you see on the handout we just passed around, and there should be a copy, I think, that was circulated to folks who are online. But as you'll see, in engaging with our community and learning about the different concerns that students and their families have, there's a broad range of topics that we'd like to cover to make sure that we're not putting too much of the focus just on these sort of quantitative outcomes that exist in administrative data, but really that we're hearing from folks and bringing that into what we kind of explore in our report. So next slide, please. So you'll also see that there's two outlines. So this kind of goes with that theme that Mike mentioned, that there of course is overlap between some of the problems and challenges faced by our communities, but really what we've heard from community in our work so far and from community leaders is that disaggregating is really important, both at this sort of high level and as we'll get to at these lower levels as well within these sort of large umbrellas. So I'll turn it over to Tino, who will talk about our community engagement.
Hi everyone, my name is Tino Camacho. I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate at School of Social Work. And I'm kind of the person who manages our community engagement. That just flew off of there. Next slide, please. So really, to begin, we wanted to start with our commitments and values as researchers coming into and engaging with Asian and Asian American and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities here in the state of Washington. We're really guided by the principles of, responsibility, for example, which Auntie Frida had very passionately told us how important this report, the weight of this report is in terms of guiding policy decision-making for our students for years to come. Reciprocity, engaging with the community organizations that we've partnered with and our community partners and supporting them also in their data needs. For example, we've been kind of going back and forth with Pico Washington and supporting their needs as data arises, and also reaching out and asking if they need things along the way. We're taking a community first approach, So community is coming first in everything that we do. We're trying to be more strengths oriented in this report, and really highlighting sort of the collective care and social justice implications of our findings. Next slide, please. And just to kind of focus on sort of our goals of this, we're using participatory research practices And this is just a broad field of different research methods and different research practices that intends and seeks to collaborate with communities, but most importantly, it seeks to represent our community's experiences and also create meaningful impact for their community. And really this looks like, right, having an actionable outcome, right, to the research, not just having research sit in the ivory tower of academia. Next slide, please. One of the methodologies we're drawing from is community-based participatory research. It's an engaged research process that includes community from the point of inception of the project to the design, all the way out into the dissemination of the research findings. We have developed a community advisory board, and this group has been consisted of community members who advise and support our project activities, and these are all key stakeholders within our local communities here in Washington State, who are experts in education, in policy, and in social service provision, who've been guiding our research process. Next slide, please. And we're also using Indigenous collaborative research methodology, noticing how our communities identify themselves both as Indigenous and non-Indigenous folks, but we wanted to draw an Indigenous collaborative research methodology. This was designed by one of our previous faculty members, Karina Walters, who's now the director in tribal health at NIH. And essentially, this builds on different principles that center Indigenous knowledge and knowledge in the practice of research. For example, reciprocity is a really key component in what we're doing, right? It's not just that we're going to community for advice, but we're trying to engage them in the process of helping us interpret the findings, share it with community, and engage community members in the research process. Next slide, please. And also things like revolution, right? Like thinking about how do we take this report and use it to make actionable change, right? Whether it's through sort of decolonizing education or indigenizing education, right? And providing, the supports our students need, right? To be able to succeed in school, right? Learn about their identities and not feel forgotten or left behind. Next slide. And through our process, we've engaged several stakeholders. We've made some institutional partners along the way, including EOGAC and communicating with some of their folks, OSPI, the CAPAA Education Committee, and some state policy stakeholders. We also have some initial community partners that we engage with to kind of branch out and find our stakeholders. This included the Pacific Islander Community Association of Washington, the United Territories of Pacific Islanders Alliance of Washington, and then the Chinese Information Service Center. Michael E. helped us to find some folks who also worked on the previous report or are engaging in processes of making their own reports in the community. For example, like someone from SEED is supporting our work as well. We have several roles and responsibilities for our CAB. They really center the accountability piece, right? Guiding us in the weight and meaning of these reports and helping us do this really ethically and responsibly with our communities. They've helped us, adjust questions in our interview guides and supported how we ask questions to students to ensure that we're not causing more harm. They also provide us really key insight into lived experiences. For example, instead of using like NHPI as NHPI, putting a slash between NHPI and supporting the language that we're using, or even the use away from Asian American to Asian/Asian American to acknowledge all those identities, and being as disaggregated as possible. And it talks a little bit about how they're engaged from inception, dissemination, so I think I'll just kind of skip over that for the sake of time. Next slide, please.
Yep. Thanks, Dino. Yeah, hi everyone, my name is Victor Tian. I'm a second-year PhD student at College of Education, and I'll be introducing the data sources we're using for the two reports. So we're putting great emphasis in both reports on the quantitative analysis, but as Mike and Max mentioned, we're also doing it in a way that the quantitative analysis provide us with directions and insights, and on the other hand, we're using our community effort and also the qualitative analysis to help us unfold the meaning of the numbers and graphs we got from the quantitative analysis. Next slide, please. So the first data source we're using is from AAPI data, which is publicly available. The data set contains demographic information, poverty, socioeconomic status, data like that. And this data set is process data from AAPI data, which is a research center housed at UC Berkeley. They use the raw data from the Census Bureau, which contains like the decennial census, which is the full count data, and also the American Community Survey, which is like the 1 year or 5 year estimate. And the data set is disaggregated down to state and county level and also down to the specific ethnic groups. Our analysis plan for this data set is to study the distribution of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander population on both the state and county level, and also the demographic analysis, including socioeconomic status, immigration pattern, etc. So if we go to the next slide, we can see this is a table of the Asian American population, the percentage of the population with citizenship. So if you can see for the Chinese population, we're seeing a decline in terms of percentage of population with citizenship from 2010 to 2022, from 71% down to 61.7%. Whereas for the Southeast Asian ethnic groups represented here in Cambodian, Laotian, and Hmong, the three ethnic groups have a relatively higher percentage of population with citizenship. And the number kind of showed us a possibility that students from these ethnic groups, from these families, they're more likely to have a different language as a primary language at home, and also they're more likely to participate in the multi-language learner programs. So kind of reflect on the point that the numbers can show us a pattern or trend, but we will need more efforts in qualitative analysis and community engagement to unfold the patterns. So if we go to the next slide, we can see for Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander, the numbers are again different. So for Native Hawaiian, Guamanian, or Chamorro population, the percentage have been consistently high, whereas for Tongan population, the numbers are lower. And as Tino mentioned, these numbers, even with high percentage of population with citizenship, doesn't entail full citizenship status in terms of voting right and participation in the society. So if we go to the next slide, we have a second data set, the S275 data from OSPI, which is also publicly available. This data set contains information about teacher and educator demographics, and also their geographical distribution and representation in different schools in the school districts. It also contains teachers' experience, salary, and turnover rate. And the data set is disaggregated down to individual level, but only down to the broad racial groups. And our analysis plan for this data set is to study the distribution and representation of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander educators to see if the students in those groups are underserved and if these educators are understaffed or underpaid. On the next slide, we can see this is a teacher turnover rate over time from 2011 to 2022. Although all three lines have similar patterns or trends, we can see that Asian and Pacific Islander teachers and educators are experiencing a higher turnover rate throughout the years. Especially after 2020, we can see a significant shift upwards, which is likely caused by the pandemic. So we are also seeing Asian and Pacific Islander educators are getting more affected by the pandemic. If you go to the next slide, please. Yeah, this is the third data set we're using, which is requested from OSPI directly. This is kind of like a set of data files are mainly divided into two categories. The first one is CEDARS data. CEDARS stands for Comprehensive Education Data and Research System. This set of data includes demographic information, absence, students' grade history, eligibility for free or reduced price lunch, and also students' participation in school, both school and district level programs, etc. And the second category is the assessment data, which includes assessment standardized tests like ALPA, which stands for English Language Proficiency Assessment, WA KIDS, which stands for Washington Kindergarten Inventory of Development Skills, and data like SGP, which stands for Student Growth Percentile. So all these different measures, assessment to for the students throughout the state. And all these data files are disaggregated down to a student level and with specific ethnic groups. Our analysis will focus on studying the academic level of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander students, and also kind of to see the correlation of their academic performance achievement with social, economic, or familial contexts. So next slide, we have a median GPA by ethnicity. This is for Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander students in school year 2022 to 2023. And the red horizontal dash line is the state median GPA, considering all students. So unfortunately, we are seeing that all the ethnic groups from the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander students are under the state median GPA. We're also seeing different levels of performance within different subgroups. And on the next slide, we have the Asian American student performance in terms of median GPA. So the story will be like drastically different. So for Asian American students, all the ethnic groups represented in this chart are above the state median level. And also we are seeing that East Asian and South Asian subgroups are performing significantly better than their Southeast Asian peers. And again, we're putting these two graphs not to like try to draw a comparison or whatever, just to present the narratives for the student groups. And the last data source we're using is from next slide, please. The last data source we're using is from ERDC. We're actually working with them to finalize and deliver the data. And our goal for this data set is to analyze the K-12 to post-secondary transition of students, and also to study the student to teacher pipeline, like the participation in educator preparation programs. Yeah, I think that's it. And Max.
All right.
Yeah.
So I'm here now speaking on behalf of Jen Wynn, who unfortunately came down with something and couldn't make it today, but she prepared all these slides, and so I'm going to summarize. And she sent some notes, which Tina will. Okay. So what I'll go through is an overview of our recruitment for our qualitative data collection, the topics of our interviews and focus groups, some participant demographics, which I think are pretty interesting, including geography, and just some things that we're noticing in the preliminary look at our data. So we want to make sure that we take a systematic approach to kind of coding our data and interviews once we have them fully gathered. So these should be seen as all preliminary. Next slide, please. So this was our sort of overview of the plan based on our budget that we put together. So we had planned to interview about 30 educators. So this would be teachers, paraeducators, and school counselors. We wanted to be broad in this definition because we know that, particularly for NHPI communities, like a lot of the educators that are in schools are not teachers necessarily, but they're still influential in education. We also wanted to interview a few administrators, so principals, assistant principals, and school site coaches. And then we also really wanted to hear from students, so really across as many diverse groups as we can, with focus groups to really get students talking and kind of bouncing ideas around. Sorry, about this. And each interview was 90 minutes long, so we really, again, wanted to give people a chance to get their thoughts on a really broad range of topics. And we I also want to just reiterate that we worked together with our community advisory board, thanks, to design these interviews. So we gathered them a few months ago to actually go through our interview guide and make sure we were covering a good set of topics that represented what they were hearing from their communities. Next slide, please. So one thing we heard from our board and from the CAPAA Education Committee is really we want to try our best not to become too King County centric, to become too West Seattle centric or Western Washington centric. And as you'll see, it's just still a challenge. You know, we've done this outreach and we've got a few people to engage with us. And this recruitment was, again, based on engaging with our board of the highest population districts of students, also with our quantitative data. So a good example of, we really have tried to do this as a mixed method study where the quantitative data inform qualitative decision making.
And I can add to this by saying that some of the districts that we actually put on this list didn't show up in the data, but were districts that were recommended to look at by our advisory board.
Thanks for that. Okay, next slide, please. All right. So the topics that we had in our interviews and focus groups were these following. So institutional and structural practices, beliefs and perceptions, well-being and mental health was big, belonging for self and students, and cultural belonging and a sense of belonging. So you'll see overlap between the sort of educator and administrator interview questions and student questions, but they were a little bit different, driven by input from our community advisory board. And next slide, please. So far today, we are kind of more than halfway through. We're getting pretty close to hitting our target recruitment. And it's been just fascinating to hear stories from all of these different groups. Some themes keep coming up, some themes are unique, and that's why it's great to try and interview as many people as we can. And as we'll see, we have one administrator who's Unifying Pacific Islander in the pipeline, so we may end up getting them, but it's hard, right? There's not that many educators with these identities in some cases for us to find.
Also, our one white educator that we interviewed worked predominantly with Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander communities, and there are some Asian American educators who work predominantly with Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander communities. So some of these numbers are like, even though their identities are represented there, they were able to speak to the experiences of NHPI students as well.
Next slide. All right, so here again in the sort of spirit of desegregation, sorry this is a little bit small, but really we've been able to get a really broad representation of people's identities within these different groups, sort of, just different single origin identities, but mixed identities as well. Like our Halianti, that's what we were talking about at the bottom. And then students, we've been able to interview a good amount of NHPI and Asian American students. We've also tried to kind of group focus groups together so that people might have more in common and get kind of deeper into their discussions.
I think these were actually self-reported too, so the Halianti, I think, identified herself as the Halianti.
Yeah, exactly.
Just to point that out as well.
Next. So again, we have tried very hard to get representation all over the state, and one could say that we did, but we could also argue that it's been more challenging. So we have done our best to follow up with our CAP members, with our education committee members to keep reaching out, and it's challenging. Next slide, please. So just again, some early themes.
Talk about this.
Yeah, actually, sorry, one more thing, looking at these notes I wanted to say about the last slide, is that we have limited participants in the Vancouver and Spokane areas, but we're still going to actively recruit in those areas. Next slide.
I can take over thanks on this slide. So here's some preliminary noticings, and just to note that these are not like final in any way, shape, or form. We haven't formally analyzed the data, but these are things that are coming up during interviews that our researchers are noticing that are kind of coming up often, or they're coming up in a very kind of salient way. So for Asian American students, some things that folks have been talking about. Actually, sorry, just to back up a little bit. You'll notice that some of them are actually very similar between each of these groups as well. So things around stereotyping, although some of the sort of stereotyping that occurs is different based on the racial ethnic group. We also, a lot of folks are talking about disaggregation and wanting to sort of like be separate, like identified as separate, right, from other groups. A lot of students and a lot of teachers are talking about ethnic studies as core curriculum rather than it being something that is just like extracurricular. Or even just, like, even when there is ethnic studies, a lot of the NHPI students are talking about like, we're learning about all these other communities, but not about our communities, right? And something really unique for the NHPI side that we're noticing is that there's a lot of issues around absenteeism that a lot of folks are noticing or suggesting that part of it is because of bereavement and cultural accommodations. Some students are out for like an entire month, right, to honor their sort of cultural protocol around death and funerals. And depending on the school, because there's no sort of like systemic structure to support that, that it's really dependent on the teacher and how willing they are to work with the student and even the principals at that school. And sometimes they're willing to and sometimes they're not. And sometimes our students don't even talk to their teachers about, having bereavement, or even their parents don't have the ability to talk to the teachers, right? In terms of a sense of belonging, Asian American students have this kind of general sense of belonging that is challenging, whereas Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander students are naming it directly as like a cultural sense of belonging. It's not to say that it isn't a cultural sense of belonging on the Asian American side, but there are some really critical things that I think Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander students are saying about this sort of cultural sense of belonging. For example, some of our students were talking about how at some schools there's spirit weeks that are Hawaii themed, and students will come in like grass skirts and coconut bras that are like from Party City. Like one of our students was like, you got yours at Party City and I have the real thing sitting inside my fridge, right, for like actual cultural use. So some of these things are making them feel like isolated. Some students are even experiencing bullying around sort of cultural attire as well. So those are some preliminary things that are coming up as we are noticing. For Asian and Asian American students, a lot of stuff is around food and sort of like bullying and things around food. Next slide. And I'll hand it over to Max again.
All right, now I'm speaking as myself. So, so again, sort of this interplay between the quantitative and qualitative data. So, just spoke a little bit about belonging, mental health, bullying. And so one way we're trying to understand this in our quantitative data is to use the Washington Health Youth Survey statewide sample. So actually you can just click through, I think 3 times, maybe 4, and it'll fill out the slide, just so I don't have to, okay, that's good. So for people who are not familiar with the Health Youth Survey, it's administered to 6th, 8th, 10th, and 12th graders in the off years of standardized testing. It's been going on for many years. And data from this study are for the statewide sample, so really trying to get a sense of at the whole state, if we can get our numbers up for these smaller ethnic groups, what can we understand? Participation is relatively high across grade levels in the 80%. One thing that we noticed, and this is not something that Health Youth Survey is trying to hide, it's in their sort of bias report, is that there's evidence that schools with more NHPI students are underrepresented in the statewide sample. And this means that schools are invited to join, and some do and some don't. And so the schools that don't join, or maybe they're not invited in the way that was effective, those schools are actually underrepresented in the statewide sample. That being said, for schools that have, within schools, there's no evidence that these kids are less likely to complete the survey. So if the school makes it into the sample, kids are represented at the same level, but there's evidence that NHPI students, the schools with more students are underrepresented. Next slide, please.
I'm sorry, I have a question. Can you repeat to me, so schools have an option to participate in what?
Yeah, so this is the Health Youth Survey.
Yeah.
And I'm gathering this from a long guide they've shared with us, but there is a statewide sample where this is the data set that anyone can use to describe what's going on in Washington as a whole.
Okay.
And schools are invited to join that. Some do and some don't, but they were invited in order to create a random sample that's even.
Okay.
And so the schools that happen to serve more NHPI students, which are often less resourced, a lot of them are in South Seattle and have resource issues, those schools happen to not have participated.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so definitely something we'd like to highlight in our report to make sure that we do a better job.
Thank you.
Thanks. So some caveats, right? As we talk about mental health, people are answering this on an anonymous survey, but baked into this, it's still all these beliefs about mental health that kids are getting from their families, from their cultures. They're going to be showing up in these numbers. So maybe some ethnic groups are going to underreport, some are going to overreport. We can't totally know what's going on exactly, but it's good to keep these things in mind. And understanding mental health might look different than what the questions, which were designed with kind of medical bent, will be asking about. Even so, we'll see there's a lot going on here. And then also, the way that people understand how race and ethnicity and culture affect themselves might develop later on in life. So maybe as we ask them in 10th grade, they don't really have a sense, but that doesn't mean it's not playing a role. Next slide, please. So just to show, in this statewide sample, which was it's about 28,000, there are about 4,000 Asian American students, and breaking them into these ethnic groups, we have 100 or more in a good, nice range of groups, which, from a perspective as kind of a quantitative researcher is going to be enough to get a reasonably accurate estimate. Next slide, please. And then on an HPI side, we can't quite get as granular with some of these smaller groups. You'll see that we represent these kind of 6 or 5.5 big groups. This other was people explicitly selecting like something else not listed here from a very long list. That's interesting. Maybe it's we're still digging into who these sort of other folks are. Next slide, please. So before I jump into some more data, I just want to show, like, at a very high level, if we look at mental health and bullying, and then we look at self-reported grades and commitment to school, these things are linked. So people who are reporting more mental health, more bullying, being bullied, are also reporting poor grades and poor school commitment. So setting the stage there, if we go to the next slide, please, we see sort of, so I'm going to go through some mental health outcomes. First thing I'll show, you'll notice that we sort of have these higher levels, Office of Personnel and Management sort of categories that are fairly connected. For the Asian American, we've broken it out into these 3 sort of geographic groups, which is not perfect, but it does actually tell a story, start to tell a story, which is depression. You could say, oh, rates are pretty low amongst Asian Americans, but if we look at Southeast Asian populations, that's actually not the case. It's as high or higher than some of these other racial and ethnic groups. Next slide, please. For Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders, I don't know if I expected to see this in the data, but this is the highest rate of any of the ethnic groups in Washington. So Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders, are 40% of kids are screening positive for depression, answering these questions in a way that is reflective of being depressed in the past year. Next slide, please. So digging into this Asian and Asian American and really fully disaggregating, we start to see some patterns where, this sort of geographic distinction does seem to be helpful. And of course, we're going to see some variation within different groups. We'll also see, as I go through a few more different outcomes, that this other category, identifying as something else that's not listed, it's hard for people who are identifying that way. We don't know exactly what that means, but it's pretty consistent. Next slide, please. We also see that depression rates, again, are pretty high among all these groups, but especially Chamorro, Marshallese, and Native Hawaiian students in Washington. Next slide, please. So, similar picture for anxiety. Can click again. Right, where as we disaggregate the Southeast Asian group and the NHPI groups, both kind of look elevated relative to the statewide level. Next, please. And again, these sort of geographic groupings useful but not perfect. Next. And again, we see this for Chamorro Native Hawaiian students. These like really pretty high rates of
with anxiety and depression. For suicidal ideation, so this is pretty alarming stuff, right? This is people on a survey saying in the last year that they've considered suicide, and just ignoring race and ethnicity, like this is hard stuff, right? So we see a similar sort of discrepancies, but about 1 in 6 students are saying this is something they thought about in the past year. Next. And again, NHPI are sort of on the high end of that. Next slide. We see some variability here. Next slide. And then again, sort of like 1 in 4 of some people in these different ethnic groups. Of course, they're smaller sample sizes, so there's some variability, but these are high numbers. Next slide. So you can click. Thank you. So, right, just takeaways, like among Asian American, there seems to be some clear need around promoting Khmer students, Filipino and Japanese, as well as these other sort of not listed here. Native Hawaiian and Chamorro students are really reporting a lot of challenges, and suicidal ideation is really especially high among a couple of these groups. Next slide. So that was mental health. This is now thinking about bullying, being the recipient of bullying. So you can see that white students are kind of the outlier here, where being bullied due to race was not common among white students, but it's pretty common among all people with all students with all these different identities in Washington schools. And one more. This is a broader question, but it's specific to schools. So this is how many people said they were treated unfairly due to race at school. So about 4 in 10, 2 in 5, 40% of people, pretty much if they're non-white, are saying there's some unfairness happening in their life at school. Next slide, please. Yeah, so right, so just this like broad strokes. You might think that there's some, difference in the amount of discrimination people are experiencing, which is possible, but at least students are seeing themselves as being bullied due to race and discriminated against or treated unfairly due to race.
I also want to point out that this is something that I've been noticing students talking about as well, like this especially unfair treatment based on race among NHPI students that I've talked to. So we're seeing it come up in the qualitative data as well.
Next slide. So then we've already got this nice long list of things that we're trying to understand. And of course, later on top of this is intersectionality. So there's sort of 3 or 4 domains that we're looking at. So gender and Asian American, Asian identity, well understood that there's a lot tied up in there in that. Disability status, sexual orientation, and then multiracial versus monoracial. So the point to make here is that we actually have enough data as we put together the statewide sample to start looking at some of these questions. Next slide. So, for example, we've talked about mental health. These four cluster bars are all different mental health outcomes. And you can see there's just this clear distinction between female and male mental health, where female identifying youth are reporting way more mental health problems. But also transgender Black youth, it's just such a clear need. Next slide. And so that first was among Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders. The second is among Asian American, and we see a similar pattern. Right? As we drill down and say, what's the impact of having 2 minoritized identities? It builds. Next slide, please. Okay, and you can click like 4 times. So this is where we're at. This is sort of a preview of all of the things that we've been doing. We've been almost finished with our qualitative data collection. We want to finish that up. And one thing I want to highlight is that something that started to come up in interviews spontaneously is the current political climate. So how are people feeling about their identities given the national political climate and what the next 4 years could look like? ERDC is getting us post-secondary and teacher data, so now we can dig into what's happening beyond, I know in Randy's presentation talked about that that's one of the criteria of high school diploma, right? You want to be ready for post-secondary education, potentially. And then once we have our sort of drafted themes and sort of the skeleton of our report, we want to re-engage with our CAB to say, what do you make of these findings? Is there more interpretation you can give us given your expertise? And also hold 1 or 2 listening sessions with the broader community, probably parents being there.
Parents and families.
Yeah.
This is one of the groups that we didn't have enough money to interview in sort of the scope of like what we wanted to capture. So we really wanted to highlight the student experience through the qualitative interviews, but we're going to be collecting sort of family data during these listening sessions as well, and working with our CAB to invite these families in to come in and talk about their experiences and see themselves in the data and what that means, and then incorporate that back into the report. So really this is part of the broader engagement process of disseminating the data.
And as you see this sort of list of topics, we've been writing as we go. So some of these are sort of fleshed out already, and others are going to be a process of integrating the quantitative and qualitative data. So that's what we'll be working on, is putting it all together and making it really clear what the recommendations would be from all of these data sources. So next slide, please. So I just want to say thank you so much for your time and for supporting this work and for partnering with us so engagingly. We're happy to hear feedback, thoughts, questions for the next phase.
I know we had a previous studies for this one, and 2-part question. So is there going to be a section comparing the changes over the year?
Yes, that's the plan. So we've kind of organized this by domain, and I think if we get to this sort of number 8, what we really have over time is these hard measures like graduation rate, like GPA. So we'll put together tables directly comparing those two.
And are other states conducting similar study or have conducted similar study that we can compare it to?
Other states, California did one 10 plus years ago. Yeah, that's the only one I know of. I know SEED did a report specific to Southeast Asian students here, which is not as comprehensive, but has some really good depth in certain spots.
There are also other reports that we're probably gonna, and published academic research that we'll draw from and compare to. For example, the Trevor Project has recently published a disaggregated report on AAPI, LGBTQ status, and one of the things, for example, that they have found is that NHPI LGBTQ students report that maybe 30 or a third of them probably report that they don't have homes or families that are affirming for their gender or sexuality. And a lot of the stuff that we kind of are trying to weave together into the report are going to be based on sort of what people have found across the US, and then also what's happening here locally, but really centering what's happening here locally.
Yeah, my question is basically how we doing compared to other states.
Yeah, I don't think we know that just because of challenges to data disaggregation that exists currently.
I think we're probably the first ones to put this out, at least in the scientific literature. And in terms of, there's a good report from California, but I think it's at least 10, 15 years old now. And if we look at the data on NHPI and Asian American students, or actually just adults, I think we're around number 3 in population for most groups, top 5 at least. So we were first.
Carrie, do you have questions, Carrie?
No, I do want to thank you very much for this, and I was very pleased. I'm Chair of Health and Human Services for the Commission on Asian Pacific American Affairs, so I was very pleased to see your information on mental health and emotional well-being and sense of belonging, and that it's very much integrated in terms of who we are and what happens. Yeah, so thank you.
A lot of that too was driven by conversations we had with OSPI and their interest in trying to highlight mental health as an issue that is coming up through their work.
Thank you for your presentation. I have a couple questions. Thank you for your work in our communities, and I do owe you a session, so I will be bringing students and families together along with Chair Access and I will plan that in the background. My question is, looking at this, where do our foster youth and children fall under? Our homeless population? I would like to know more, and I love the intersections and including the social determinants of health in your report. So is it safe to say that this is a baseline study for where we are at now after the pandemic? Is that even safe to say?
Yeah, I think the challenge is that there are so many different topics that I think both the CAB and other stakeholders have identified. Homelessness is coming up, particularly for NHPI students. For example, I don't know how specific I can get. In one of the districts that we interviewed, someone was saying that a lot of their NHPI students are qualifying for homelessness benefits. At the same time, there's a chronic absenteeism issue that's happening at that school, right? And it's really kind of can we do this with the data that we have? I think that's the most challenging part. Another thing is there was a recent report that showed, and I shared this, I think, with the team, that NHPI youth experience the most homelessness amongst all racial ethnic groups in the state of Washington, which is quite alarming. But I think the way that they classify homelessness is also you're living in these sort of non-nuclear units, right? Where you're not living with your parents with the dog picket fence situation, but you're living in an intergenerational household, you're living with family members, right? For example, a lot of Marshallese students and a lot of Kofa Islanders come to the US, right, for education, but then they stay with relatives, right? So those things would be classified as homelessness. In terms of foster youth, I haven't seen that come up yet. And I also know for a fact, and maybe Mike can talk more about this, because I think he has been in conversation with folks about foster youth data in the last few years. But that's not something I think that we've come across yet.
OSPI's data, the individual student level data, we may be able to intersect with their race ethnicity because there is a variable that capture the foster homeless students. There is a variable there, but a lot of this data are going to be surprised due to the sample size. So we have to figure out how to capture that part, right, from a quant perspective. I know you have a question as well, but let me just quickly emphasize two things, because we do appreciate the feedback so much. At the same time, we're also wondering from the community's perspective, right, what are the most important sort of data or the sections you want us to highlight. We can also, today, our main purpose is we share with you, we have lots of data, right? Both quant and qualitative. What are the main things you want us to make sure we go deep or make sure we mention in the report to be able to do, the reason we ask that is connected to today's conversation. We don't want the report at the end of the day to be something on the shelf, right? We wanted to generate action. That's also why, during this process, our team members so much engaged with the community to pave the foundation for the next step. So they got the buy-in from the beginning, right, while we're generating this report. But then how do we leverage on all the existing initiatives and be able to utilize this report to generate actions for policy, legislative advocacy, right? That will go back to help inform us which part of data we should emphasize in this report. But help us think about those questions. That will be very helpful.
I'll be very honest with you. When our communities hear research, it's a bad word in our cultures because of the extractiveness and what has happened, with colonization and all of that. But moving forward and looking at this generation, I think we built enough rapport, especially CAPAA, and you have leaders here at the table that will be able to bridge that relationship closer. I withheld some of our community members from participating in this because I wanted to hear more about the approach and the framework of what that looks like. Thank you, Dr. Spencer, for being very intentional in creating a framework that is in alignment with what the community needs are. looking at this when I go back to my leaders, you look at language and citizenship, that's a very sensitive issue for a lot of our people. So moving forward, Dr. Min, thank you for bringing that up. I would be more than happy to help you set up some of the community meetings with communities you have not, and with Dr. Camacho or all of your team here, your amazing research team here. We could set up some, but we have to be sensitive in some of these areas, as you all know. And so this is very important as our legislatures are really pushing to help advance the quality of life for our people and our communities, but also to work together with other communities. And so my last thing is, I would like to say is, how are you making sure that there is no lateral harm being done between Asian Americans and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander communities? Because that is something that is very important as we continue this work. Despite the differences or indifferences between the two communities, it's very important our students still sit in these classrooms together. So as we're doing this, we're not adding more harm. As we're thinking about reciprocity and relationship building, what does that look like moving forward in a healthy space and way? So that's something that I would like for us to talk to Chair Sisavadis here. We can probably set up an appointment to talk more about that, as that piece of engagement is still important, yet in the public, but also within our own commission and within our own people. So thank you for doing the good work. I want to make sure that that is highlighted, that the relationships between our communities are healthy, and that the conversations are healthy, and that we mitigate and we continue to contribute healthy civic communications across our communities. So I'm going to leave that there. Chair, do you have any remarks or anything like that?
Thank you, Chair Butler. I think first of all, lifting up that healthy conversation between our NHPI communities and our Asian American communities. I did want to lift up another point, the response rate from males in both cohorts that you may have evaluated. Would you possibly be able to address cultural stigma as a point of male members not responding to having considered ideation on self-harm or suicide, because that is a very big part of our culture, where the image of the male members are to not admit to so-called issues of, it's looked at as a weakness. And so that is not something that male members of our communities, and I can only speak for my community, but I think that's important consideration across board you may want to check on. But I do want to lift up this, that as we continue to work with data and desegregate it with the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander and then the Asian communities, that being really mindful of lifting that so we know that the next 10 years when we go through this, it is this coalition and collaboration that will save us.
Thank you, Chair.
I can speak a little bit. Oh, Mike, did you want to go? Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I mean, I'm sure many of us can answer this question, but, I'll just say this, that, actually national data on mental health, whether or not, regardless of ethnic group, shows differences between males and female identifying students, and I think that, there's some literature that speaks to how women or young girls, presenting women tend to internalize emotions, those kinds of emotions more, whereas boys or male identifying individuals oftentimes present externalizing behaviors, so rather than sort of sit and be depressed or be anxious, they go out and, in sometimes, behave in, I would say, not so good behaviors, and so oftentimes the expression is a little bit different in terms of the stressors that people experience in their lives, how they express those differences, how they express those feelings are different. And as you were saying, gender and culture, not just sort of ethnic culture, but also, just the culture of gender, really, shows some real differences. And Tino, go ahead. You can continue
Yeah,
if
I
you
think
want.
some of the things that we've been digging into are sort of the stereotypes too, and the gendered stereotypes that exist for communities, or for these communities. I think to your point, I think the response rate, I'm a little bit hesitant to say on like kind of what is causing it. But we do know that like there are other things that people engage with, like Mike was saying, through some of the qualitative interviews too, about, you know, sort of what students are doing instead of going to class, right? Which is also interesting.
Yeah, one comment I'll make here is that I think as we go through this process, we're realizing that we could have entire projects devoted to each of these areas. So we would love to keep this relationship going and figure out, you know, where is there momentum to dig really into men's mental health, or dig really into cutie pie wellness, or, you know, these areas that we've heard from our community where there's already.
Can I get the one last voice?
So my question is, if you have a timeline in mind, because we do have legislation coming up that I think would be it would be beneficial to have some of that data. We have some data from the OSPI and the Healthy Youth surveys, but it'd be really amazing to get the concrete data, from your study to be able to use that.
Yeah. So.
Do you mind repeating for
Yes,
the
of course.
audio? Thank you.
Someone asked about, I'm sorry, what was your name?
Angelique.
I'm sorry.
Angelique.
Angelique asked if, what was our timeline for the data to sort of be completely analyzed and complete. For the qualitative data, I think we're anticipating by the end of January for data collection to wrap up, just given sort of where we're at now. From there, we're trying to implement sort of a speedier analysis method.
Can I jump in and say something?
Yeah, go for it.
I know the report is due at the end of May to CAPAA, and then to the legislature at the end of June.
Yeah.
So at that point, there will be a physical document that you can reference. Until then, it'll all be preliminary.
Yeah.
So, we're happy to share like a PowerPoint with you, something like that, but it probably won't, because we'll want to go through this process of sharing the community and having that come back to us. So
that's the short version of what I said.
I just want to say something. I think we need to guard the data, as you all are the holders of it, and we need to ask permissions first before we release that. So I'm going to say that, and then go ahead, Chair Sasavati, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I just want to really thank you to UW, to you, Dr. Minsa, and Dr. Spencer and team. Incredible so far. I'm looking forward to kind of seeing where this yields report. I want to just kind of share that, Washington State really has been one of the leading states when it comes to disaggregate data. You're not going to find any other states doing what we're doing. We've been doing for so long. Since 2008, this report of history is telling us where we're at now. After the 2008 report, I think Edie Abelero that commissioned that, and then Michael former Edie as well, did the sub report in 2015. We had House Bill 1541 closing the educational opportunity gap that came in. That's where the EOGOEC with the implementation was formed after that House bill was signed. And so great work and happening. And of course, with the vision, our former executive director, Toshiko Hasegawa, really prioritizing this new report, updated report with an effort, with a specific purpose of looking into health. Now Commissioner Edie Nam Nguyen here leading the way. This is exciting work, and so really just thank you to the community, to our commissioners, yeah, I'm really excited. Thank you all.
We have 5 minutes on the clock. Commissioner McKenna.
Thank you. Hi, everybody, and UW team. So great to have you here. I'm sorry I'm not on video. I'm actually a little sick today, but I am so grateful that you all are here, especially on a Saturday, when you do have, family responsibilities and joys like seeing a new grandbaby at home. So anyway, so thank you for being here. I really want to just emphasize, as somebody that has participated as part of the advisory board, how good this process has felt. And I think to Lydia's point, very, very it's very, very few and far between when we participate in a research process that actually does feel good. And so I think that says a lot about the team working on this. And I want to just give a huge shout out to Dr. Spencer and Tino and Max and Buddy, who's not here, but all people who I've worked really closely with, learned so much from, and are truly so brilliant. And I think our communities are really, really lucky to have them leading this work as thoughtfully as they are. And I know that it makes me feel so good to know that even when I'm not in the room, that the right advocates are there doing this work and talking about the right things. So I really just want to shout that out because I think it's a very good model for this type of work and research going forward. I also just wanted to say, I think take a chance to say that one, this presentation was awesome. I think I'm really familiar with a lot of this and some of it is still like some of the data is still new to me, but I think that if this doesn't emphasize the importance of disaggregation, I do not know what will. And so one, just applaud the comments around comparison has no place here. And it's critical that we're looking at these two communities as two separate, massive, diverse communities. And then the very last thing I also wanted to say, oh, on that note, actually, before I go to my last point, what Lydia had talked about in regards to lateral harm, I think disaggregation and having it as a priority when you're in a multiracial space, such as our commission, is super important for preventing lateral harm. And I think that when it is not a priority, when disaggregation is not a priority, and when communities are not being listened to when they're asking for something, that creates lateral harm. So I also want to just say this is an amazing example of how two communities can work side by side in deep solidarity and do everything we can to make sure we're listening to communities and honoring them and what they're asking for. So wanted to just make that note, and thank you, Commissioner Faitalia, for saying as much as well. The last thing that I want to say really fast, and I was actually going to say it in my commissioner report today, but I'm going to take time right now instead because it's really important and it came up. We looked at data just now on queer and trans community members and specifically our youth in this case, but just want to point out that we continue to see an inconceivable amount of attacks on trans rights and people who identify as LGBTQIA2S+. And it's really critical that as a commission, where this community is also very underrepresented on our commission, that we support queer and trans communities and center them in all of our work, serving NHPI and AAA as the most impacted in our communities, and that we don't shy away from that conversation, especially as we move into a changing political environment where we're seeing that people are okay with this, people are voting for this. And I just really want to emphasize that if that is a conversation or a community that we are not comfortable even talking about, we need to prioritize getting training around that and reaching out to community members who we can learn from so we can make sure that we're prioritizing them in our work and centering them. And so really grateful that that data was brought today and that it gives a very tangible reason besides all the other ones for us to make sure that we're having that conversation. So that's all. And thank you again, team, for being here. It's really great to see you all.
Thank you, Commissioner McKenna. Commissioner Ping Ping, I see your hand up. We have about a minute.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, just it really opens my eyes when the data are disaggregated in this way. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I just want to, I mean, for me, I have a question about the multiracial people responded to the qualitative research. I noticed that, yeah, I mean, the talking is pretty fast, but I noticed in the NHPI students, there are 694 multiracial, and then 388 NHPI alone. So I'm just, and then I didn't notice the Asian and Asian American statistics, but I'm just curious about how, yeah, this is pretty big student group, multiracial, and how to handle them in your research. That's my my curiosity, and yeah, so I know the time is up, so I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Ping Ping. Go ahead. Did you have?
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, we are thinking about that. And for this report, for everything we've shown so far, if people had multiple identities, they counted in both groups. But we were kind of like, we looked at gender and mental health together. We're planning to look at multiracial status and mental health together. So definitely huge. And I think, again, like 2/3 of the NHBI students were saying they're multiracial. So big issue.
And in terms of the qualitative focus groups, we are I think we've had some focus groups, and I have to confirm this with Jen, but I think there's been at least one that was an API group where students were multiracial, but Asian and Pacific Islander. So we're creating space for people with that specific like multiracial identity as well.
Good work. Are there any other comments, team?
One comment from Karen Park, thank you for this eye-opening presentation. There is a question, maybe, I don't know if there's time for them to ask that. The question is, can you speak to multiracial students who included, oh, that was a question, that's what thank you. And then the next comment from Frida Takamura, the EOGOAC will have a report with recommendations to the legislature, so in part answer to your question, Dr. Sun, the report might give possibilities on what data needs prioritization and emphasis. I'll be glad to expand with the team member.
Thank you, Frida.
Which prompted me to propose, this is just the idea, because one is how do we emphasize, highlight the coalition, this strong message, right? Yeah. The other one is how do we call for action? I was wondering like whether a way the CAPAA and UW team could write a preface together, or like just a 1 or 2 pager thing even attached to the end to highlight this couple of message we wanted to highlight, right? We can document this process as well, how a research project, engage with the community, engage with policymakers. We can describe this coalition to highlight the message clearly at the beginning. If you are interested, we can come back to you, right? We can co-write this.
Yeah. Let's co-write.
Yeah.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, we can put it there. Then when we communicate this report, our community members would hear the message first, right? They have this foundation keep in mind when they interpret the report.
And we can reach out to CAPAA to organize what that would look like, what the collaboration would look like for that.
Wait for you. Seeing that there are no other questions or comments, Ms. Angela, do you have any other questions? Sure. Okay. Thank you for your work. Okay, and now it's time for lunchtime. Thank you so much. Gratitude for all of you guys' hard work. I know what it's like to be in that space. So thank you so much. Keep up the good work, Doctor. Keep up the good work. Professor Spencer, Malo Opito, for all of the work you're doing along with this awesome team. We look forward to our continued collaboration, collective efforts alongside community. And so cheers to doing the good work. So thank you very much. Next on our agenda, lunch is provided by Sabahai Thai, a local staple of Everett, Washington. Let's take a break for about 15 minutes to grab some food and refreshments before reconvening at 12:45. The time now is 12:30 and we are now in recess. Lunch break, the time is now 12:51 and I will call this meeting to order. We will now turn to our next presentation hosted by Make Us Visible. Please introduce yourself. All staff load your PowerPoint presentation. The floor is yours. Thank you very much, Ms. Angelique.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Angelique Chong, and I'm the State Director for Make Us Visible Washington. I've asked Commissioner Sisavati to also co-present with me. Commissioner Sisavati has been in our steering committee, as is Commissioner Ping Ping. And we're here today to give you a bit of an overview about what Make Us Visible is, what we've been doing as a chapter, and some updates on Senate Bill 6314, which we plan on reintroducing this upcoming legislative session. And today, we're going to be first talking about Make Us Visible here in Washington. We are a coalition of parents, students, teachers, and educators that all want the thoughtful and comprehensive inclusion of Asian American and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander history in our K through 12 curriculum and classrooms. We believe this is a long-term solution to combating anti-Asian American bullying, racism, and violence. And our chapter began its formation in early 2022 when a group of parents and a student all wanted to basically address what was going on during the pandemic with the surge in all the violence and racism that I think we all witnessed. And I reached out to make us visible national because at that time, New Jersey had just passed its bill requiring AAPI education in K through 12. And so was inspired that that's something we needed here in Washington. So a group of us, we did some research and outreach to the community to see what the situation was here in Washington and learned that there is ethnic studies, as you all know, that's been adopted and recommended, but it's not enough. It's not enough when our stories and histories continue to be absent and invisible, and when people are relying on what they see on the media and what leaders in power call our community. And so we view as education as a preventive measure of combating this. And our chapter has focused on 3 major pillars, and that's community building, advocacy, and education. With the community building, we kicked off our community launch back in March of 2023 at the Wingwood Museum. We had over 150 people attend from Spokane, from Yakima, Olympia, and a ton of people also attended virtually. It was really inspiring because I think broadly we as a community felt that this was important. And we've been holding different community building events as well. We've had student showcases, which are student-led and really give students a platform to share their voices and talents. We've held a film screening event of the film Take Me Home with the producer and director that came over here to talk with our community. And we're always open to other ideas for community building. On the advocacy front, we've hosted narrative and advocacy workshops. We are all new to this work. I myself am not one to ever work on drafting a bill, but I find myself doing this because this is that important. And we have student volunteers and parents who are all becoming advocates. And so we always run through a narrative workshop so that they hone their stories as they talk with people who have decision-making power about why this is important. We also, and we're going to talk more about this, but we were behind the filing of Senate Bill 6314 this past legislative session, and Senator Hasegawa is here as one of the co-sponsors, and that was very exciting because the community came together and we were able to get a champion, Senator Twina Nobles, and she filed the bill on our behalf and has committed to refiling it this upcoming session. Another thing that we've been doing is as we're building alliances and seeking support from various stakeholders, we recognize the WSPTA is also an important advocate and has a big advocacy program. And so just recently, another steering committee member and I, Angela Gang, we went over to the Washington State PTA Legislative Assembly, the 2-day conference. And leading up to that, about 5 months ago, we put together a resolution to make inclusive and historically accurate history, standards, and practices a resolution for the WSPTA. We debated whether to do this as a coalition or as individuals, and we decided that it would be more compelling to do it as parents. So we presented that to the delegates. It first passed the board, and it's a broad resolution covering all historically marginalized and targeted communities. But we use the AA and NHPI communities as an example of why we need to combat all the bullying and racism that a lot of these hate-based crimes and are primarily race and ethnicity based. And so that's something we were able to share. And so that actually passed unanimously by the delegates just a few weeks ago. So we're really excited about that because what it does is it sets the basis for the WSPTA to further advocate for when we do have our bill. And on the education front, we believe that we need policy, and that's been something that teachers have asked for. But we don't have to wait for that to start the education. We've partnered with various education groups, such as the Asian American Education Project, Wayne Luke Museum, Puget Sound Education Service District, and putting on professional development workshops for educators across the state. To date, we've held 3 workshops over Zoom and have had an attendance of over 200 people. And in the most recent one, we focused on the Southeast Asian American community here in Washington. Because that's a community that we don't often hear about, but there's a large presence in Washington and a very interesting history where the governor at the time decided to take them in, in 1975, and we were one of the first states to welcome, Vietnamese refugees. And Commissioner Sisabati was one of our 3 community members that also spoke at that workshop. And the feedback that we got from teachers is that that was the most moving piece of the workshop, because they do want to hear about the lived experiences of the community. So we plan on continuing with that. We know this work it's a marathon, it's ongoing. We also want people to know, and educators to know, that there are a lot of really good resources out there that are free, accessible, vetted, and at the end of the presentation, you'll see a long list of those resources that we like to share with educators. A few other things that we do is our volunteers have done classroom visits. We go into schools, we talk with middle school students, high school students, whoever will invite us, and we share about our own histories. We give a little presentation, and we also make it fun and engaging. These days, students like Kahoot, so we prepared a Kahoot on Asian American and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander pop culture and history. We always have prizes, and I brought some here today. It's not a mascot, but I do have coloring books, and that we would love to share. And we also are developing our own lesson plans straight out of the coloring books, and we have, Make Us Visible has high school interns that have been working on those, and they're already, they're available online as well right now. Okay, next slide. I'm gonna have Beck share more.
I'm gonna have to just kind of say, I'm just really honored to be part of this, being honored with being part of Make It Visible, and really just want to thank the team and really the director Angela here for her relentless. This work is tough, and it is. As an Asian American, I'm thinking this is a no-brainer, guys. Why don't we have a bill? Why aren't our children learning about this? My life would be different. And so, I mean, it takes, people can't stand on one leg. It takes all of us. And just kind of seeing where the work is done, and now that we have 6314, we're going to be reintroducing it again. It's lifting up my spirits, and I'm looking forward to it. I mean, to date, within 4 years, we have 24 states, chapters, Washington being one of them, and 7 bills have been passed within 5 states. The latest one was in Delaware, where in September. So this is incredible. Florida passed a bill of all states, right? New Jersey has a Commission on Asian American Heritage to survey, design, and encourage and promote the implementation of, the studies. Connecticut allocated $140K towards salary and other costs dedicated to really helping local and regional school boards develop curriculum. Rhode Island is developing in-house curriculum resources, and Florida again, they have a working group under the Department of Education to develop curriculum. We want all of that here in Washington State, and we're excited. We're excited this bill is being reintroduced, and I'm crossing my fingers that it passes this year. And CAPAA really being really grateful to the team, the education committee, to CAPAA for allowing us to be a part of this work. So yeah, we've got resources. As Angela had mentioned, we've got coloring books, right? To date, we have 2. The first one was, we've shared it out to and distributed for over to 11,000 folks that has this book. It's a partnership with Admirasia for first. There's 24 Asian American, heroes, and spanning 14 ethnicities and 15 states in this coloring book. So it's very, very popular. And the new one, the latest one is the one that we partnered up with these, the Pacific Historic Parks, Admirasia again, the National Park Service, and the Japanese American Museum of Oregon, and 25 figures, heroes in our community, spanning 11 ethnicities and 24 states and territories. So we're really excited. It's really reaching really the stakeholders, and so again, you can request a hard copy to hello@makeusvisible, or download the free digital ones and coloring books at makeusvisible.org/resources. We can share that later on.
Next slide. So I've mentioned the WSPTA resolution that passed, and I have here the resolved clauses for you to see. And in the rest of the resolution, there's background and data about how historically marginalized groups face bullying, racism, at a higher rate, and how education can really impact mental health and just educational goals overall. So that language is there, and the title of this is Inclusive and Historically Accurate Standards, Curricula, and Practices. Next slide. So why is this important? Why do we need to learn about Asian American and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander history? Washington, as you might know, has the third highest population share of AA and NHPIs in the country at 12.2%. And based on OSPI's own database, the majority of students are non-white from the last school year. And in 2023 to 24, there were 192,770 Asian and Asian American students, over 41,000 Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander students in our state. And this doesn't account for those with two or more races. Yet we've seen a surge in anti-Asian American violence, bullying, and racism. And studies have shown that discrimination does negatively impact the mental health and well-being of AA and NHPIs. There's short-term and long-term impacts of bullying and hate-based violence on individuals and communities. And there are, for example, worse academic outcomes, a wide range of mental health issues, such as increased depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and substance abuse disorders. The Mental Health Association, I want to share, they reported that suicidal thoughts, plans, and attempts are also rising among AA and NHPI young adults. And we've heard some of that data earlier. And 40% of LGBTQ plus youths who are AA and NHPI have seriously considered suicide in the past year. When broken down by race, suicide is the leading cause of death among Asian American young adults aged 15 to 24. And this is true of no other racial group in this age range, and that's from the CDC. So we view education as a long-term, next slide, preventative measure against anti-Asian American bullying, hate, and violence. The history of AA and NHPIs are very deeply intertwined, yet it's often forgotten and ignored in the classroom, as I've mentioned. My own children have barely learned anything. I have a 10th grader in high school and an 8th grader, and they have yet to learn about all the histories and the deep roots of AA and NHPIs here in Washington and our country. And while we do have an ethnic studies framework, it's often that the entry point for educators is what aligns with social emotional learning standards. And oftentimes, anything touching on AA and NHPI history goes to the history of Asia or world history, which is very different because we know that there are deep roots here in the US. And national surveys have shown that culturally responsive and racially inclusive curricula and teaching practices would benefit all students, not just the AIDA and NHPI students, resulting in so many academic benefits, such as increased engagement, attendance rates, improved critical thinking, higher test scores. And it's also important because, this fights against the model minority myth and the perpetual foreigner stereotype, which I think we're going to even see more of in these coming years. And I think we're going to have to brace ourselves. So this is a way to be proactive and ensure that people see the entire diaspora of our communities. And it's why I got involved, because during the pandemic, my own children and I were walking down the street and a woman slowed down her car and shouted at us and did one of these slant eye motions. And it took me a second to realize what had happened. I was in shock. I was like, where are we? But this is something my children witnessed, and they didn't deserve this. And no one deserves that. And so I'm here as a parent because I'm doing this for them. And I hope that by the time they graduate from their schools in Washington school system, that they will be exposed to more of the histories and stories and narratives and know that they're part of this. And so that's why I'm compelled to do this work. And I know Ed wants to share as well.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I mentioned I think my life would be very different if we had curriculum that speaks to us, that shares us to others. I didn't get an intro, a very brief intro to anything Asian American in our histories until AP history. I think that's like 11th grade. And it wasn't until you went to a university or a college that had an Asian American studies or, a class that, it was, for me, it was Rereading America was really one of the books that really just kind of moved me to get me engrossed into, to learn a little bit more, to care a little bit more. And so, and it just brings back the memories. And for myself, I remember as a child, I had my first bike. I must have been, 7, 8 years old. And I went to fill up my tires at a gas station nearby, and I met this one white kid, and we were about the same age, and he's like, "You want to ride together?" So we ended up riding that afternoon, and it was fun. He asked me to go and to his house to play some more over at his house, and so we rode over to his house, and he said, "Can you wait here? I have to ask my mom if I can, if you can come in and play." So I waited. After a moment, he came back and he was looking really, really, really sad. And he's like, "I'm sorry, my mom doesn't want me to play with your kind." And it never really hit me, but as a child, you just kind of took that in like, oh, okay. But as you grow older, this is something that continues to impact me. And I don't fault anyone, but we need to change that. No one has to feel as a child growing up to this day. And I think that takes, again, education. We need this. We need our, we need to protect our children. We need to uplift our communities. We need to empower them. We need to educate them. And, really everyone else. So that's why this work is so meaningful to me.
Sorry, but can you guys wrap up your presentation?
Yeah, we're going to go right into the Senate bill. So that's the next slide. And I have a copy of it for everyone here in this room, along with our proposed edits. And Senate Bill 6314 is what we filed last legislative session with Senator Nobles. And you can see it's got two sections primarily. One is for OSPI to revise and adopt its learning standards to include AA and NHPI history as part of social studies learning standards. And the second part of it is for schools to provide that instruction. And we've kept the compliance piece fairly broad because we think it's more important to emphasize that we need the content included. in already existing frameworks of social studies of US history and Washington history. And in the proposed edits, we've met with, since the last session, we've met with numerous community leaders, Pacific Islander community. We've met with Commissioner McKenna, Silly Salusa, we've met with Utopia, we've met with education advocates and seeking input on how we can make this a bill that's from our community. And so what we have here is an introductory paragraph, and I'm not going to read it, and it's something that I'm happy to share for you to share with the rest of the commissioners that are not in this room. But it goes to the why of why this is urgent and why we cannot wait for things to be perfect and aligned for us to ask to be included. And you'll also see that this has a projection of being implemented in 2028. So it gives all the stakeholders and those involved in rolling this out time to develop that. But ultimately, we want to make sure that that the content is available and that the community is behind the pooling of resources along with OSPI. And so the disaggregation piece is something that we've been hearing and we know is important specifically to the Pacific Islander community. So that's something that you'll see reflected in this version with the Asian Americans and Native Hawaiian / Pacific Islanders. We've added a line to the history to also specify incorporated and unincorporated territories of the US, because we think that's important to also highlight. Further down, you'll see that we have the community's input and involvement in providing resources. And we also wanted to make sure that we are in alignment with the current ethnic studies framework and make people know that there are resources there as well. But oftentimes we're left out of ethnic studies because we're viewed as white adjacent or, the model minority, which is why, we need to ensure that it covers all areas, US history, Washington history, and ethnic studies in terms of materials that can be available. And this is also where we want to have discussion with CAPAA on what your role may be. As you saw in New Jersey, they formed a commission to basically have the oversight. We already have a governor commission for Asian Pacific American Affairs and an education committee, but what is the capacity of CAPAA to help, at the very least, be a place of providing resources, or do you want more oversight role? And that's something we can, you can talk about internally, or we can have a separate conversation about, but I wanted to put that out there that we look to CAPAA as, at the very least, a resource.
That was the question that I had. I just saw this previous part of the bill, and the wording on it is that we're a resource for school district for instructional material. I don't think that's appropriate role, because our staff, we're not education expert, and our committee is volunteers. So my fear is that this becomes an unfunded mandate, where we're not prepared and we have to request additional fund later on that may or may not be provided to do this project. And it just becomes lost within the RCW as one of our mandates that we really don't do. So my suggestion would be somewhat this lack of curriculum development steps here. I would think something like not so much another entirely commission, but like a task force or work group to identify and develop education standards and curriculum on this particular topic to distribute to the school district. And we definitely want a role in that. And I think the appropriate role for that is as a member of that task force and giving us oversight in that regard.
Kind of like what happened with ethnic studies.
Yeah, kind of like what happened with ethnic study. But the fact is, we don't have instructional material on hand. We would have to find it somewhere. Yeah. And that would necessitate money. But if this bill is passed, then the process of developing curriculum basically become unfunded until we keep submitting requests for a budget that might never arrive. So this, I know you're trying to make this basically a zero cost
Not necessarily. I mean, every bill goes through a fiscal analysis, and we don't know yet what that's going to be. It's very possible there could be some funding or maybe not, but we do know that there are a lot of, and I'll go to the, if you can go to the next slide, there's a list of resources that actually already have lesson plans and content that are free.
Yes,
That and so that's one place, and that's something that we've also shared with OSPI. At some point, we've shared some of those links. And, but we want educators to know that this is already out there. But I do like the idea of possibly a task force where CAPAA can play a role.
Yeah, these things exist. I know there's already standard curriculum. The important part is for my purposes, for our purpose as the commission is, and for purpose of education in Washington State is somebody needs to put it together and also tailor it to the history and the cultural of the state, which really that part is the important part, and then distribute it. I think CAPAA can play a role in oversight. I'm not necessarily sure what the people that should staff it. I think somebody like OSPI, State Board of Education, has more funding and resource to staff curriculum development and curriculum identification and putting it together. That's just my suggestion. I do think there needs to be something there that spells out, these are the people that will put the curriculum together for schools to use as a resources. And I don't necessarily think CAPAA.
Well, but I do want to comment on one thing. It's not necessarily a set curriculum. What it is asking schools to incorporate content when they're already talking about things like citizenship. When they can talk about Wong Kim Ark versus the U.S. who established birthright citizenship. They can bring in authors. They can bring in other content when they're already teaching about these topics. That's the goal of this bill. It's not like since time immemorial that has a set curriculum, which is why we think that the compliance piece would be easier for teachers and well received. And so far we're hearing that that's more doable versus having a specific curriculum.
Yeah. But same comment.
Yeah, no, I would love to explore that.
And we have 5 minutes. We have some commissioners. Nikki, who's online?
First, it's Commissioner McKenna, then Kosai, then Lerman.
Okay, Commissioner McKenna, you're up first, and then Commissioner Kosai, you're after.
Thank you so much. I will be fast. Thank you so much, Anjali and Ek, for bringing this today and taking the time. Anjali, I know you volunteer, and I really appreciate your time deeply for that. I also want to say that I'm really grateful that I've gotten the chance on behalf of PICA to meet about this. And I think initially there was some concern, just for transparency, with the group concern about the inclusion of NHPI in this process. And I have read through the bill, and I don't have any concerns about the disaggregated language that's being used in the bill. I know the years before implementation will be really important for making sure that this work is done in a way that does honor community. So I'm thinking of that for sure. And we absolutely will support this bill as it goes through the legislative session. As a continuous dissenting voice, I feel I want to acknowledge that I hope that you all can appreciate that I'll always be honest. And I think it's really important that I just provide some input today on some of the presentation pieces that I feel like could maybe be tweaked so they could sit a little bit better with NHPI folks, including myself. So I hope this is helpful, and I'm happy to talk more about this offline, recognizing that we have limited time. But just a couple of things. When there is aggregated data that's presented, it definitely erases the NHPI community, and it does not accurately represent Asian communities either. And so I would encourage within presentations that happen to find disaggregated data to present on both communities. And if it's not available, then just say as much, because I think that's also very helpful for people to know where that disaggregated data is not available. And then a couple of the other things, something, Anjali, you had mentioned is that disaggregation is particularly important to the Pacific Islander community. I really want us to work on moving towards it's very important for both of our communities. And I say that as somebody that identifies as both Asian and Pacific Islander. It's very critical for both of our communities. And I think my question, and this can be a follow-up later, I don't need it answered right now, but are there other communities that are working on similar bills that are also going to be introduced in the 2025 legislative session? And I ask to make sure that we can work in solidarity with them as much as possible. So one bill is not given priority over the other and we don't cause harm. Going back to what Lydia had mentioned earlier again. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I do want to respond to that last question, and that we do have a meeting this coming week with Representative Morgan, who is behind the African American Studies bill. So I plan on engaging in conversation and seeing how we can ensure that we're all successful, or, kind of going forward, what makes sense to move towards inclusive and accurate history.
Thank you, Angeli. And will you report that back to the commission so we're aware?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Kosai, and
Sure.
then Commissioner Layman after, please.
Okay, first of all, thank you for the presentation. Thank you for going in depth, and thank you for your work on this. Obviously, it's very important, very heartfelt, personal issue for a lot of us. My questions kind of center around two things. Number one, I think, is in alignment with Commissioner McKenna, who just spoke about how other communities, perceive this as well, or other communities working on this as well. I know that, for example, oftentimes our community is used as a wedge in this conversation around ensuring that art histories are taught in this thing. So, for example, I know there was a little bit of challenges and controversy in Florida in particular. I think that we saw with something similar, but I wanted to just kind of ask and make sure that we are continuously engaging with other communities. And at the same time, if there are other communities that have gone through this process before, and what is that kind of precedent that was set by them look like, or who are those people that worked on this kind of issue? So that was the first piece. And then the second piece is obviously, I think I agree with Executive Director Nguyen around the standards of the curriculum as well, and some kind of oversight or task force or whatever that looks at it, because oftentimes we see this curriculum oftentimes not being vetted or used properly, or including some kind of bias within it. So we just want to make sure that those pieces are also vetted properly and up to standard. So those are my two main concerns, or my main thoughts. I know that we are supposed to meet at some point. I went on that long trip, but I'm back now and happy to follow up after this meeting as well.
Commissioner Lehrman?
Yes, thank you. Appreciate the presentation and the mission as well. Understanding that it takes a lot of work, and you guys are doing the hard work to implement this at the local, state, and national levels. Sometimes I know it takes a long time at the state and national levels to make stuff like this happen. But if I just personally, as a commissioner, wanted to work in my own community, and I was able to, I can send this, there's a downloadable color book. I have the coloring book. It's awesome. I could send this to my local school board superintendent, going to schools. But I got 20,000 kids in my district, so maybe 15,000 kids per grade. My question would be, are you wanting to give those is there enough funding to give hard copies of those coloring books? If I could pick a class grade and talk to my local schools and give that to them, just to show the teachers that this is out there? Or is there not that kind of funding? You prefer just to send the link, and maybe 5 or 10% of the teachers might print these out. They have to go to their own print shop and get that done. But I know in my community, my kids, I have 4 kids, my elementary school kids have brought home Native American coloring books during Native American month. They brought home Black history or Black coloring books during Black History Month. And they've brought home Hispanic coloring books, but never in May Asian American. So the teachers, at least my kids' teachers, don't have these. Again, I could send this link out, but is there funding to get hard copies for individual people, or are those hard copies more saved for decision maker, policy type people?
Yes, what I do know is we're going to have another round of printing soon, and there was enough money raised to be distributing this to teachers. I have a bunch of copies that we give out to community members and teachers and lawmakers and such. So we do have some supply here, physically in Washington, but we can also request more. And there can be arrangements, with our national to print more and keeping those different schools in mind.
Okay, I'll get a hold of you, but I think I'll at least send this link out for, it won't hit all the teachers. It's not as easy for them as if they have the hard copy given to them, but some of them might take the initiative to print it out themselves. Thank you.
Commissioner, any other comments?
Thank you.
So Angeli, I want to say thank you very much for your hard work. I did get some feedback from community members, but you mitigated those and it wasn't an easy process. So I see you here. I honor your work that you're doing. Thank you for meeting with Morgan in the coming weeks. I am really, like Nam, if we can spell out number 4 with the commissions, but I also want to make sure that I am very upfront and honest with you as well, as it's dangerous when it comes to curriculum, meaning that when we ask for this, we can't just say that we're going to give certain material. We have to be intentional, meaning there's University of Washington that is sitting here, and we also have Asian American and Native Hawaiian professors and Oceania professors that sit in academic spaces all over. If you don't have it yet, I would highly recommend, from a CAPAA standpoint, that maybe it's a committee led by education chair, and getting these folks in and marrying the work together so we're intentional with the framework and we don't bring harm in regards to implementing curriculum. And also you have the chair of Health and Human Services here. What you're going to see, Angeli, is really emphasis on the social determinants of health, and education plays a big role. CAPAA can support that also, but CAPAA is very mindful of the other communities. So lean on us to help inform this work, so that way you're not doing it, just with other folks. That way we can get behind you and really support this work. So good job. My hat's off to you. It's not perfect, but we're still going to keep moving forward for our children and future generations, and we're here for it. So let's work together. Thank you very much for the presentation, Angeli. I look forward to meeting with you in the commissions. And so we're going to go ahead and go on to our next agenda item. But I would love to connect you with our UW team if possible and marry that work together. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having us. Yeah.
Bear with us, Commissioner online. We're gonna have a roundtable next. We're gonna ask you to stay 10 to 15 minutes.
10, 15 more minutes. Thank you, Angeli.
Thank you, Angeli.
Next up on our agenda is the roundtable. Due to time, team, if it's important, please go ahead and unmute, but we're gonna start with Commissioner Kosai. If it's not important to report back to roundtable, but I know all your work is important, I'm here for it. But if you want to say something, feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat so that way I know the order, okay? Commissioner Kosai?
Okay, I will be quick, and it is important. So many of you may have remembered that not last meeting, but the meeting before, we had a public comment from an individual from the Minidoka Pilgrimage Committee who came to talk to us about this wind farm project that is happening in Minidoka, outside the Japanese American incarceration site in Idaho. I just wanted to follow up and let folks know we did follow up on that comment. The CAPAA sent a letter opposing the site, asking the government to look for alternatives to the wind farm project that's outside the Japanese incarceration site. And in addition to that, we've also been working with a number of federal elected officials, as well as state agencies, including the governor's office, on this project as well. So I just want to let people know that we are following up on that issue. The only other thing that I think is of noteworthy that I just wanted to just kind of say is that this year, or a couple months ago, we lost our friend Francisco Aragon, who is a longtime activist in the CID, as well as a stalwart of the Filipino-American community here. I just wanted to recognize him and his incredible legacy that he's leaving behind. He was known for his no BS approach, and he was always a fighter for our communities, and hopefully that we can all follow in his footsteps as strong advocates for our community. So that's all I have to report.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Lehrman?
Yes, thank you. I guess the only thing I'll talk about, since we're short on time, Commissioner Huey already alluded to it, but on October 12th, they had the National Historic Site dedication for the Filipino Community Hall of the Yakima Valley in Wapato. As she mentioned, that building opened in March of 1952, so it's 72 years old. There was a lot of hard work that went in by that community to make this a National Historic Site. Our Commissioner Emeritus, Ray Pascua, spoke there. There was a very, very, very large turnout, and you could just tell from the passion in everyone's voice that that community hall has been a backbone pillar of that community for many, many years, and excited for them and was honored to be part of that celebration. Thank you.
Thank you. Good work, Commissioner Lehrman. Commissioner Ping Ping.
Thank you. Yeah, I think one thing that already been covered is by MUV. Washington Angela has talked about what is the role could CAPAA play. So that's in my plan to report. And then another thing I wanted to share here is some community member from Asian community here in Spokane wonders what Human Rights Commission will do if something was reported to them. How, like, yeah, where will it go? What's the follow-up? So it seems like community members are they wonder what will be the follow-up. I myself has some personal experience with because I had a hate speech attack in 2023. So I reported to the city's Human Rights Commission, but there was no response at all. So I kind of echo that community members' concern or question. Yeah, so this is something I just wanted to know what usually will, except for, you know, leaving a record, like, yeah, we have something happened, we have somebody reported, so then what's the next? What are some real experiences of these cases? I just wanted to, I think that I want to report it to our commission here. Okay, and the other thing, for the time, I'm just going to share this. Okay, thank you.
We'll follow this with you offline. Thank you, Commissioner Ping. Hopefully we can have a conversation offline. Commissioner McKenna?
Thank you. I will move most of my report to our next meeting. The only thing I'll mention right now, just as we're heading into winter, housing and food continue to be two of the greatest concerns for community members across Washington State. I know at PICA, these are our top two requested services that we are actually, because of the decline in COVID-19 and anti-racism dollars, we're having a very, very hard time filling these gaps. And we're gonna see a lot more community members evicted and on the streets or doubling up or in cars. And we already have, and also higher numbers of food insecurity if we're not able to close these gaps. So just putting in kind of a note for everybody in your own advocacy spaces that these are two areas. I don't think it's just our community. I think it's all of our communities that are, you know, communities of color and other underserved communities that are experiencing this gap. And if you see any opportunities around funding, or if you have an opportunity to talk to somebody that might be, might have some type of impact on a funding opportunity, like the Chamber of Commerce, any other government agency, any other private funder, please put in a good word, because the winter is hard, and this is an especially hard time to be hungry and without a house. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner McKenna. I will make sure to flag that up along with Lehrman and thank you very much. Commissioner Sistavati?
Thank you. Just want to just highlight a couple of things. So we had our first, with the Lao Senior Outreach, which I'm one of the board members with, our first very successful fundraiser on October 5th. I want to just kind of thank and acknowledge Chair Paitalia for joining us and really, you know, opening it up for our organization. And the other thing is both Commissioner Pongsa and I are leading the 50th anniversary for the Lao celebration. 2025 is a big year for a lot of our Southeast Asian communities, as you know. from the Vietnamese, the CAPAA, as well as the Laotian. So we formed a coalition to do a celebration, to get a proclamation out, and also have witnesses. Hopefully the governor can sign, have witnesses. We're hoping to be at the state launch, so we're looking forward to that. So more things to come from there. So thank you.
Thank you. Good work, Commissioner Sisawati. Commissioner Paula.
Very quickly, we are following up with the Seattle Police Department still on the police officer that spoke or misspoke about Janvi Kandula last year. That is still ongoing effort on our end. And we still have to hear back from the police department on that, while the police department is considerably being investigated for several different allegations right now. In addition to that, we had several incidents in East King County where seniors from the Indian South Asian community have been targeted. And we are following up with the South Asian Police Advisory Committees to try to educate our own community to file complaints, to step forward on that. One senior was particularly put in detention because he had asked an individual about their child, and the police were called, and it became a public law dispute. And anytime there is a public dispute, the police are required to take one individual into detention. That is a little known fact that our community is not aware of, and very often individuals in our community, whether they are domestic violence clients or they are seniors, do go into detention. We are finding a pattern with that. And so we are following up both with our state legislators as well as the police on that. That's some of the work we're doing, so I'll close at that.
Incredible work. Thank you, Commissioner Paula. Let us know how we can support you in your community. Thank you. Are there any other comments, last minute comments or anything like that from the commissioners? Sure. Sorry.
I'm just,
Commissioner Carey.
no,
Apologies,
I'm
Commissioner.
just gonna make it really, really brief, just a couple of quick updates. We had an excellent Health and Human Services Committee meeting last month, and really trying to pull together all the efforts with committee members on our priorities and dovetailing that in with I think I'm the newest member on the interagency, Governor's Interagency on Health Disparities. So pulling together those two things, and we had an excellent presentation by Washington Thriving, which was kicked off by introductory remarks by Representative Lisa Callahan from the 5th Legislative District, and with her focus on youth mental health. So with today's presentation, and it was just feeling very encouraged and energized by the work that is being done, and the number of people that are putting in the energy towards this work. So we're hoping to bring it all together. And finally, I just want to mention that the last month I was very fortunate to be able to travel to Korea and Japan. And part of that, in addition to having a wonderful vacation time, was able to meet with the National Mental Health Center of Korea. And incredible leadership there, and was able to tour their psychiatric hospital. And then in Japan, I was able to visit the Children and Family Support Center, along with a children's foster home called Wildflower House. Was able to meet with the mayor of Koto on housing and healthcare, and finally was able to take a look at what Japan has been doing in terms of their public housing over decades. So, and what that does is that it gives us, or me certainly, there's a much more global perspective, international perspective on health and human services, and how hopefully that information and that experience of being able to visit can bring to bear the work that we're doing here. Thank you.
That is good work, Carrie. Thank you for that. That's special. I can't wait to catch up with you. Thank you. Thank you, commissioners, for all your work. I hope to catch up with each of you individually, and I'll talk to Brenda and Nagin about scheduling those meetings. Right now, we're going to go ahead and give the mic over to Executive Director Nguyen to discuss meeting dates for 2025.
Yeah, we sent out the meeting dates for next year. Our next meeting will be in January, will be online. As discussed, does anyone here have any other comments on next year's meeting dates that you have not already provided to staff? Okay, seeing none, I think those meeting days are adopted and final. Please put them on your calendar. We'll also send out whole invite because some of the location other than the Zoom meeting, we have not yet booked. And otherwise, I hope you guys enjoyed the meeting today. It was intentional that we have education as the focus. I'll try to have future meeting also focus on a singular theme. I think unless there's comments about not having that, I think it's actually useful to have focus meetings. Our next meeting is probably more on legislation as we head into the new session. And finally, I would like to actually end the meeting with kudos. If anybody have kudos for people in the commission and staff, please give them now. I'll start by giving kudos to our chair, Faitalia, for helping out. I know how it was very much logistically difficult and a lot of hard work for her to help the Samoan delegation visit Washington. It was the first time that happened, am I correct on that? And we hope to have future meeting, and CAPAA would like to help out in any way. So, and I saw how hard she worked and how difficult it was to organize such a meeting, especially last minute. It came together within the last month, even less. So yes.
Thank you, Edina. I want to say thank you very much. I want to give kudos to our team here on CAPAA, Brenda, Nagin. Thank you for holding our communities the way you do, especially you, Edie Nguyen, for showing up. Yes, you know how our communities work. But I am happy to have a strong team that is willing to move in this community center. So thank you for making it happen. The Prime Minister went home very happy with our commissions, very happy with our communities and the work we are doing here in Washington. And so she conveys her thank you to all of you. Do we have anybody? I also want to give kudos to Exa Savati and his work in his community. Was invited to sit in his community in October, and man, he moves and shakes. So and I got real seat to it. All the elders were happy. It was intergenerational. It was special. It's work that has happened for a long time, and just to watch Ek weave in the history and the history of his community into the beautiful evening, and watch the elders happy, but also the next generation serving and stepping up. Ek, congratulations and my hats off to you and the team for doing that. Commissioner McKenna, I've heard a lot of good things about the studies you are helping UW with and your work also in the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander community. Your name comes up a lot. I just wanted to give you gratitude for all of the hard work you are doing in our communities and doing that. And Lolita Upala, same with you. I can't sit in a meeting without hearing about her. It is an honor to hear about the work you are doing for our communities, and especially going after hard issues in regards to social justice. That is not easy, but you are there. And I am just so proud of this team. Lehrman, you as well, Ping Ping, all of our commissioners on here, you all do hard work. And so I want to honor that. I hope you take time to rest and rejuvenate. Come Monday morning, we're back to it. Please lean in on each other. If there are any other kudos, now's the time, team.
I just want to echo what you had mentioned, Chair. I really want to just thank the team, the CAPAA, staff here, just incredible work. I know it's, just transitioning through to kind of change, but you're holding it down. Edie, when really enjoyed it. I like this new focus of really focus on specific, our strategic plans in education this time around. Really intense, as you all have witnessed. And, it's incredible. So great work. Thank you so much for your support of our communities and our team.
I just wanted to take to also acknowledge Edie Nam for transitioning us so amazingly well, meeting with us personally one-on-one. Thank you for doing that. And for the team, the staff, and for constantly reminding us on the things that we need to do. How often I exhaust Brenda with password requests. Thank you so much. It's very needed, and I'm so grateful for that. And for all our committees, today was such an eye-opener in education.
Yes.
I'm so glad that we are doing these specific areas of focus. I would love to see more of that. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you. Anybody else online? Commissioner Hugh? Okay, that concludes our presentation for the day. Oh, Commissioner Ping, I see you online. Commissioner Lerman, okay.
Yeah, I just want to thank for today's meeting so smoothly going on and finish now. Seeing you all in Avery Community College, really, it's very nice feeling here. Also, our ED Nam Win, has a, today's meeting has a focus on education. I learned a lot, and I appreciate this format very much. I also want to thank you for Commissioner Akras. Sastawadi did a narrative workshop that sharing your personal story that you shared today in the whole commission. That story really stays with me and makes me know your childhood time better. It's just, because I was not born and raised in this country, so this really educates me. And thank you for educating the whole state's youth generation and myself there. Yeah, thank you. Thank you all.
Commissioner Ping, Commissioner Lerman?
No, nothing additional to say. Thank you. I was just gonna wave goodbye when we're done. Thank you.
I love it. Okay, that concludes our presentation for the day. At this time, okay, we already passed that. That brings us to the end of our agenda. The time is now 1:48 and we are officially adjourned. Congratulations.